And you are watching another edition of Blue Splits, the first time in about 2 months. Plan on being back a little bit more frequently. Joined by one, Mr. Michael Nania, who's been hammering the head coach and GM search. So I'm gonna be throwing a lot of it to Nania. Nania, who is your? This is kind of off topic, but your favorite dunker of all time in the NBA?
In the NBA? Wow, that's a
NBA,
random
off the
question to
top of
start.
your head, favorite dunker of all time, because I'm gonna be throwing lobs to you like Jay Kidd today. So whoever that dunker may be, Nania, I'm Jason Kidd, and you're gonna be lobbing some home because I'm throwing a lot of this to you today.
I'll appeal to you as a Nets fan. I'll go with Vince Carter.
Oh yeah.
I feel like the
Okay.
athleticism combined with some of the
Mm.
tenacity in his finishes is like a unique combination. So I'll go with Vince.
When the NBA was my first or second sport and not my fourth, now it's become so
Yeah.
bad. But the days of Vince Carter and Ben Wallace and KG and Tim Duncan and all that stuff. But a lot to talk about. Obviously, playoffs last night did not work out the way we wanted to. Nani, I'm sure you were rooting for the Ravens, and I guess the Lions the Lions game went the way we wanted to, but the Ravens game brutal. Mark Andrews really screwed us in the end there. So now we get to watch Bills Chiefs, which is just so exciting because it's very easy to root for the Chiefs considering they get no calls, underdog story, all this stuff. And obviously we love the Bills as Jets fans. And then on the other side, we got the Commanders, which okay, cool. You could root for them, even though it kind of burns because it's like, hey, defensive coach with a young quarterback. That works out for them, works out for the Texans. The Jets, it just never works out. So even kind of hard to root for them, but I'll root for them over the Eagles. So playoffs going on. Obviously, Jets are in the thick of the GM and head coach search. Apparently, people are thinking it's going to be done within the next week or so. Hopefully, this week I'm ready to just be done with the discourse and some of the arguments on Twitter, which kind of being really really separated from Twitter the last couple of months, just trying to kind of separate myself from the Jets in their season. Going back to Twitter, you really
Oh
realize
yeah,
how
yeah.
much of a cesspool it is. Like when you're basked in it for a while, you're kind of just accept what it is. When you take a break and then go back, holy crap, like some of the opinions on there are absolutely brutal with like some of these guys who have I'm on whether it be 800 followers or 8,000, but all they do is just troll all day and just throw out these opinions. Like, Nani, I read the article and we'll talk about the head coaches, but like the lack of research. You put an article, it was great. I loved it. That's why I retweeted it. But it's like it took me what was like 10.16 seconds to
Yeah.
research this about Aaron Glenn, and nobody does it on Twitter. So absolute cesspool, but I'm excited to be back with you, sir.
No, yeah, I feel that. I mean, I don't really get to take super long breaks because I do kind of rely on it to just, stay up with the news and share articles or whatever. But even if it's like a full day where it's like, I'm not going to look at it today. I'm going to watch the games. I'm going to go for a walk, go out to eat, go play basketball, whatever it is. And it's like you come back to it after an extended break and you're like, I don't think I really missed that. It kind of
No.
highlights what's going on there when you kind of are stuck in it. Especially like I don't even look at it during game. I don't have the app on my phone, so I only look at it when I'm like on the website and I publish an
Mhm.
article and I'm sharing it, or like I'm trying to see what's going on, maybe get some like inspiration on like what topics are being discussed, what needs to be addressed. But other than that, when I'm going throughout my day, I don't have it on my phone, so I don't get into that trap. Like, I have 5 seconds here while I'm standing outside. Let me look at what, season ticket holder since 88
Yeah.
thinks about Aaron Glenn. So, but yeah. And like on that same subject, like TikTok is gone, or is it back now? I don't even know because I've never
It's
had it,
back.
but it's
It's back.
back. I
I
enjoy
never had
the
it. My wife's
eight
big into
hours
it, but it's
without
back.
it. But it was going to be my favorite day of the year, but that's
Yeah.
unfortunate to hear. But yeah, like it all kind of works together and has created this kind of society where research isn't a factor. Everything you say
Mhm.
has to be you got to get someone's attention in 2 seconds, because if you don't, they're going to move on to the next thing. Like there was this one like take I posted yesterday where I was talking about why I don't think penalties are directly attributable to coaching in the same way that a lot of people do. And I put it out
Mhm.
one way where I was more like aggressive with it, where I was like, oh, so Antonio Pierce must be the best head coach in the league because the Raiders had the third most penalties or whatever. But I think I like mistyped one of the stats. So I deleted it and reposted it in a more like kind of nuanced way. And that
Mhm.
was, more measured. And it got like a fraction of the attention, because people only want to engage if it like makes them angry and they have something to, scream about virtually in all caps.
Yeah.
But when you put it out in a measured way, like here's a nuanced take based on facts and details, then it's like, I don't want to engage with that, because I'm used to TikTok where I get 2 seconds to resonate with
Grab
something,
attention.
then I got to move on. So that's the world we live in, I guess.
Yeah, dude, it's crazy, man. Like, I don't know. Like, you'll put out something. I'll be like, hey, I like these head coaches in this order, and then like you'll get like a guy who's like, shut up, bitch. And it's like, whoa, dude. Like, hold on, man. Like, I haven't said anything to you yet. Like, who are you? But people are so confident behind a keyboard. It is hilarious. But yeah, hopefully we can break this down a little bit more for people, because like with whether it be Aaron Glenn or any one of these top with any one of these like coaches or GMs, it seems like there's a lot of misconceptions. Like, oh, Aaron Glenn didn't have a great defense, over these last couple of years, but you look at his defense and it's like, hey, he took over the 32nd ranked defense in the NFL, and you don't go from 32 to 1 or top 5, so we'll talk about that. We'll talk about a bunch of things. We're gonna say hello to the chat again. I'm sorry for being so MIA. I will be back much more often now, whether it be bi-weekly for now until it picks up a little bit, or weekly. I will be back at least twice a month. Hopefully joined by Nania quite frequently, like I was last year. Connor Long, our own in here, saying that I'm joined by the Aaron Glenn superfan, which I don't really consider you the Aaron Glenn superfan, Nania. I think you're relatively measured, and with the whole Aaron Glenn stuff too, it's not even like, and I think you put out tiers, right? Like he's in your A tier.
Yeah.
There's an S tier. It's not even like you're a super fan where you think he's the best coach ever. I just don't think the pool, and we don't have to talk about Aaron Glenn and like individually right now. We'll get into him, but like the pool this year isn't so great. Like I'm not impressed by a bunch of these coaches where there's only like 1 or 2 guys, maybe 3 that I'm like okay with. Like there's really just a limited pool.
Yeah, no, like when I put out my tier and everything, I feel like S tier is part of that. Like here are guys who are, I think amazing candidates, and there was just nobody in it. So I think he's at the top for me, but that's not to say I don't acknowledge that, all things being equal, I would rather have an offensive coach. I would, rather have someone with experience, whatever it may be. There are plenty of things that you could say against Glenn, and I fully acknowledge those. But at the same time, when you consider that the Jets aren't getting to interview a lot of these offensive candidates, whether it's Ben Johnson, who I have my own critiques of Ben Johnson, but whether it's him or Joe Brady, who they haven't interviewed yet and now cannot because he's in the championship round. Todd Monken through the Adam Gase thing a couple years ago. Like there's a lot of candidates who could have made this a more interesting conversation between offense versus defense, CEO type versus schemer type, but it's kind of just looking purely at coaching and not offense versus defense. Aaron Glenn kind of, to me, is the clear cut with Vrabel out of the picture now, the clear cut number 1 in my mind. And there's a lot of good candidates that I would also be on board with, but considering a limited pool, it's not saying he's the greatest candidate of all time. It's just like you said, it's not amazing.
Yeah, and like even I don't know if there is a true like S tier. Even before Vrabel was hired, like he's more of an A tier. I don't think he's a guy who cannot miss. Like looking at his work, he would have been my preferred guy, him or Monken. But Monken's seemingly not going to take an interview with the Jets, or they haven't requested him. I don't know if it's because of what happened in 2019 where they picked Adam Gase, which worked so well over Monken. But he's not going to be interviewing with the Jets, and even with Monken, like it's glaringly obvious. We've failed so many times as head coaches, and so many head coaches fail. But one of the things you could say is undoubtedly, as a good coordinator does not necessarily make a good head coach. Obviously with Saleh, good DC, maybe not the best head coach. Monken could be a great OC, but not necessarily the best head coach. Cliff Kingsbury is probably getting another shot, but he failed in not only with the Cardinals, but he also failed with what was it, Texas Tech in college that he failed with. Like, so it's, he's a guy with a ton of risk to him. So, But yeah, with Monken not interviewing and with Rabel gone, I do think Glenn is my number one, and we'll get into a little bit why. I don't think you need to, and I would prefer offensive mind too. Like I would prefer Glenn to be an offensive guy. I know I'm not talking about Ben Johnson really because he's not going to interview with the Jets. He denied their request, and like you, dude, with Ben Johnson, have some questions. I don't know exactly what they are. I can tell you a few things. He seems to be super cocky. So I am, he's a guy who almost seems like a McDaniels type. It could work, but I could also see it flaming out very quickly. I don't know if he's going to be considering how cocky he is, if it ever goes wrong where a team is losing a couple of games in his first year, they get 5-6 wins. Is he going to talk to a locker room full of, full grown football players in the right way? Or is he going to be kind of, for lack of a better term, a douche? And with that offense, let's be real here. You got a really good offensive line. You got really good receiver, or at least really good receiver and a huge deep threat in Jamison Williams. You got a good tight end. You have a great running game. So what happens when he goes to the Raiders, who have nothing, pretty much, or the Bears, who are, have some flawed spots? So Ben Johnson is not some slam dunk candidate in my mind either, while saying he has a great creative offense. But he has a lot of talent, and I'm not sure his attitude is the best thing out there. His attitude definitely concerns me. So just quickly on Ben Johnson, is that some of your concerns that you have about him?
Yeah, pretty much. I think that sums it up. I mean, it's just like the arrogance too. The fact that, last 2 head coaching cycles, he denied interviews. And this year he's showing selectivity, and that's justified. When you have a job like that, where it's very comfortable, good organization, and you're just focusing on your specialty, obviously you're not obligated to go coach the Jets or whatever. So you should, be selective, but it does seem like he has this kind of idea that he should be the coveted candidate and he should be selective. Like there was a report that he wouldn't even interview unless he was going to get hired by that team. So things like that, it kinds of line.
So why even interview?
Yeah, like you got to interview him. He's not to this point where he's like, a Sean Payton, where it's like, I've proven myself. I'm an asset on the market. He's as unproven as every other candidate out there. So it just kind of shows arrogance to me on top of all the other stuff that you said. It really feels Gasian. I know his resume pre-head coach is better than Gase because, he's built up his own thing as an OC. It's not like he was riding, on Peyton Manning's coattail. Adam Gase had a mediocre season with the Bears. So he's better in that aspect, but just the demeanor that he shows kind of reminds me a lot of him. And he worked under him too, so it's not totally surprising.
Yeah, I just don't know if a football team is going to buy into him if they're losing. Especially that arrogance. Like you have to have some level of humility, and we'll talk about having humility when we get to Flores, because it seems like that was Flores' problem. Like my shit doesn't stink, and I'm the smartest guy in the room, and obviously he flamed out in a terrible way with the Dolphins. But we'll get into all the candidates kind of individually. Again, say hello to the chat a little bit. Chicken Jenkins says, glad to have you back. Can't wait to hear about your head coaching GM options. It's, again, a lot of it on Michael Nania. I know he has a lot of factoids about these guys, and this defense ranked there and this offense ranked there about these guys. I'm more general baseline. I'll be completely honest. I'll get more into the weeds, into the draft prospects and obviously the free agent guys, which I did start to do the draft guys, which a little preview for that. I'm getting into Mason Graham right now. And early on, like 2.5 games in, I don't think he's some can't miss prospect at 7. So he's not some slam dunk. He's nowhere close to Quinnen Williams. There's some lack of technique. There's some tightness to him. I don't think he's some slam dunk prospect, but getting into him, then Nick Millen, Johnson, Campbell, Banks, and the rusher from PSU, who I'm blanking on right now, Penn State, which I don't think he's going to be even an option at 7. I think he's probably going to get picked based on everything I'm hearing. But you'll get those reviews in a little bit. The years 2025 and Strain has officially been retired from the Jets vocabulary. Ulbrich going to the Falcons, got to root for him. I don't think he's a bad dude or anything like that. I never really truly root for anybody, but it's not a guy who I want to see fail or anything like that. Which, speaking of, Nania, how do you feel about Mekhi Becton being a martyr? Everything was wrong. Everything that was wrong with him was the Jets' fault. Can't believe he got out of here. And I'll acknowledge, the Jets aren't the best place. Keith Carter is an idiot. They might have not handled him in the best way. I acknowledge all of that stuff, but is the Mekhi Becton discourse about like him being some martyr and everything that went on with the Jets being Jets' fault and not Mekhi's, and now all these big accounts are tweeting out, "Oh my God, the redemption tour of Mekhi Becton gets out of New Jersey. Now look at him." Like, a little bit ridiculous. I put it out on Twitter. It just annoyed me. I think I put out like, "Hey, the Jets did not force food down this dude's throat, and did not force him to be immature." Tweeting out, "I am a left tackle," refusing to switch positions at times. The big bust T-shirt on in an interview, all that stuff, just super, super immature. Takes a very minimal deal to play guard with the Eagles. I don't think he was not very willing to change positions with the Jets. So I was never a big Mekhi Becton guy with the Jets because of his immaturity, but some of the discourse about him right now on social media is quite wild.
Yeah, I mean, obviously you got to acknowledge the success that he's having, because it does seem like he's fitting pretty well and has been an improved player. But, at the same time, it's like, like you said, a lot of his failures were his own fault. Like, he didn't even want to switch sides at tackle, let alone play guard. And obviously all the other stuff was largely his doing. But I guess in a way, it kind of shows that the Jets are kind of a victim of their own reputation in that way, because clearly Becton is showing that he does still have the talent to succeed in the league, maybe even if not at tackle, at a different position. But with the Jets, he kind of viewed them in such a negative light that he almost didn't maximize his own potential while playing with them. So it kind of highlights, I think, the importance of getting high character guys who are going to, put in everything that they have, regardless of, where the Jets were struggling, whatever, because there are going to be ups and downs. So if you have to be in that perfect situation with Jeff Stoutland, amazing players next to you, and with a
like
winning
Johnson.
Organization to be successful, then again, good for him. Like, he clearly has the talent and is making the most of it. But for a team like the Jets, you need guys who aren't going to be influenced by the situation and just have the talent to, and the work ethic to push through that and be successful regardless.
A little mentally fragile.
Yeah.
So Peter Castro says Flores is the best coach out there. I think you're a little bit higher on Flores than I am personally. My problems with Flores is it's 5-0 season, 3 years. That's concerning, right? Like, you want to, especially we're going to be developing some type of young quarterback, you'd assume. 5-0 season, 3 years is concerning. 3-0 offensive line coaches in 3 years is concerning, right? Obviously he kind of didn't have the best relationship with Tua, even though apparently their contingency came to a consensus that he was the guy for them in that draft. And then he didn't think he was going to work out, and kind of played games with benching him for fits and all of this stuff. And then apparently he goes behind the GM's back because he wants Deshaun Watson and is negotiating a deal with for Deshaun Watson behind, the staff's back. And then that deal doesn't work out. They were, I think, hesitant because of the whole allegation stuff with him. But then he has like a blow up with the front office, and then he goes to sue them. Like, is this with all the shit that's gone wrong with the Jets? Do we really want Flores, who ended so badly with in Miami? Like, I could see him working out. Which, by the way, his last 2 games did not look great. I don't want to base stuff off of small sample sizes, but the Vikings did not look great, and they were much more healthy than the Lions. We'll get into that. But a lot of volatility with Flores did not work out. His offenses weren't great when he was there. Recycling coaches obviously showed struggles developing a young quarterback, suing the team. Him and Woody Johnson, like, is it really going to work out with Flores here? I'm not the biggest fan of Flores, but with that being said, I wouldn't absolutely hate it. It would be like a C plus hire to me, just because I think it's super volatile and is either going to work out or go down in absolute flames.
Yeah, I think everything you mentioned is legitimate, and those would be my concerns that have me looking at him as not an elite candidate, but more kind of high upside, low floor, because I think he could definitely blow up in a lot of ways because of what you mentioned. If he doesn't make adjustments to his coaching style, to not his personality per se, but just the way that he manages relationships. If he doesn't make those adjustments, then yeah, it probably will go that way, because with the Jets, all of these things are amplified off the field. But based on what Ryan Fitzpatrick said, it seems like he has confidence that Flores has learned from these last 2 stints, being in Pittsburgh, being in Minnesota under Kevin McConnell. And I just think, schematically with his defense, he's someone you could trust to be successful there because he's established himself in multiple spots now that you know what you're going to get from him. You know what his identity is, and he's had success
Mhm.
consistently. And I think he's some good offensive connections between, being in Pittsburgh, being in Detroit that could help him hire good staff. And I also think there's something to be said for these second time coaches who have, had rough ends to their first tenure, have taken some years off, experienced different things, and
Mhm.
they have the ability to kind of build on the experience they already have. Like you look at Dan Quinn, like Brian Flores, first time head coach, 3 years off, two of those as a DC for Flores, I think three for Quinn. And then, now Quinn's doing a better time, second time around. Todd Bowles
Mhm.
was similar. Although I don't know how much of Tampa Bay's current success is Bowles because they're mainly an offensive team, but regardless. So yeah, I think there's those type of coaches are appealing to me. Guys who are a second time coach who have had extensive time to really reflect and learn from it. Guys who showed potential the first time they did it, not like an Arthur Smith
Mhm.
or a Matt Nagy, where it's like there's not a ton of success to really build off of. Because Flores did have some success in that first run. Obviously, there was a lot of drama, but the on field results compared to the talent they had and the expectations is pretty solid, I think, over that 3-year run with the Dolphins. So he
Mhm.
had that potential, had some time off. If he can learn from it, I think there could be something there, especially because I think his personality, if held in check and controlled to a healthy degree, could
Yeah.
be what this team needs. And we were just talking about Mekhi Becton. The Jets have had a lot of players like that on this team, and a Brian Flores could be what you need to get that in check and get the most out of these players, but only if it's to a degree where he's not so abrasive to the point where he's fracturing relationships, cycling through offensive coordinators. So if he can do that, and you find that out in your interview, you find that out talking to people who have worked with him the past couple of
Mhm.
years. We don't know, but it's up to the Jets to vet that. Which do we trust them to? I don't know, but yeah, if you could find those things out about him, then I do think there is some upside.
Yeah, it's a concern of like alienating Tua. I know he had some beef with
Yeah,
Kenny Stills. You trade a superstar player in Minka Fitzpatrick, who's still an All-Pro level player with the Steelers because of their disagreements. Then, like you said, like yeah, he has some good connections, but the thing is, like, hey, are these guys going to be willing to come in, coach with him, considering his reputation? Unless he's built those connections over recent years, and maybe that's a sign. Like if he is hired and then you have a bunch of guys from the Vikings come or something like that, then it's like, hey, okay, obviously he might have changed his ways a little bit, a little bit. But we'll see. Again, he's not my favorite. I probably prefer Glenn, and we'll talk about that. Brady's a guy who I like just based on the offense they're running and all that stuff. The concern is again, good OC versus good head coach. Like he could be a smart offensive mind, but he seems like he may be a little bit of an introvert and all that stuff. And is he going to be able to get up and talk in front of 100 dudes? I don't know. Again, good OC versus good head coach. It's a huge question with Brady for me. But Peter Castro is the Beast Breaker fan. I have no idea what that means, Chicken Jenkins, but nonetheless, miss you, Joe. Miss you, Tony. I think Dr. Dunkstein or Carter talking about is that Dr. J Dunkstein? I don't know. I think so. Or Carter. I'm saying it's Carter. Carter is my favorite player of all time for obvious reasons. PC till the Super Bowl. I'm not sure what that is necessarily, but nonetheless. Jay Smooth says Nania also didn't tweeted he didn't want Glenn because of the last game. I'm assuming Nania is very sarcastic. I do not think that is the case, but Nania, tell us why you don't want Glenn after the last game. We'll get into that now. We'll just do it. They sucked. They let up 45 points, right, to the Commanders. Aaron Glenn is an absolute scrub. Their defense was never good. You want an offensive guy, all this stuff. That team is successful because of Ben Johnson. What are the other arguments against Glenn? And then tell me a little bit about why Glenn is your number one right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think biggest stage. You had the week off, you're playing a rookie quarterback, allowed 45 points. I mean, that's not the guy you want as your head coach, personally. So I was a fan previously, but that was a huge turnoff for me. But no, I don't think the sarcasm translates well on Twitter. I've been doing this for years. I thought people would catch on, but apparently it still doesn't. But that's motivation for me to keep doing it. I think it's funny, honestly. But there's like these stupid AI like summaries of the tweets now that I look at sometimes just because I think it's funny. And even if you do it on this tweet that I put about being done with Aaron Glenn, even that's not picking it up. Sometimes it's like, oh, this is a humorous take on Rex Ryan being the Jets best coaching candidate or whatever. But it thinks I was being serious about Aaron Glenn, and obviously a lot of people do as well. But I'm not. He's still my guy. I was just kind of poking fun at a lot of the people who said that in a serious tone. The fact that one game should ruin his head coach candidacy just because, and look, it wasn't a great game, but I think the number of injuries they're dealing with, we've known about this for weeks and weeks, but
yeah,
and it was added to in this game with Amik Robertson going out 2 snaps into the game. So like, they have a quarter of their defense, and I'm not really going to hold that against him. He should be evaluated on his whole body of work, not what's freshest in your mind, just because.
Yeah, Nani, I want to add to that quickly too, because it's like 4 or 5 starters too. It's not even like just a bunch of depth guys. Like it's I think it's 4 to 6 starters, something like that. Especially if you keep, or if you count the corner who went down like the first 2 snaps, whatever it is. But like Aiden Hutchinson's your best player. You're missing linebackers. Like they're missing
Ali
so
McNeil,
many
Carlton Davis. So just like at every level. So it's kind of like impossible. It's not like, our D line's out, let's compensate for that by blitzing, or like corners are out, maybe let's give them some more help or anything like that. It's every single position. And, again, looking at the whole body of work, for the most part, the way he navigated that for most of the season is a huge plus on his resume. It didn't work in this game, but you can't forget that in week 18, they held up extremely well in a huge game against the Vikings. And then they had multiple games throughout the season where they were in that latter half of the season where they were giving up single-digit points, 20 points or less in games that they had to have in that division chase without all these players out. But just because people started paying attention to Aaron Glenn a week ago, and this is the first time they really watched him, now he's bad, apparently. So, I think those are overreactions, and I don't really hold that against him as a coaching candidate.
Yeah, and he went from it was like the 32nd defense his first year there, like 31st, and it was like 27th, and then it was low 20s, and now it was like 7th this year or something like that. In terms of like DVOA or whatever the number was, I saw it was like they were top 10 in their defense, however you quantify that in the NFL nowadays. But it's the improvement on defense. It's the fact that he's missing a bunch of guys, and people are like, oh well, he blitzed too much and all of that stuff. But like, do you want to just drop back and not blitz and get diced up by Jaden Daniels with a bunch of guys who can't cover because you're missing a bunch of guys in the secondary? Like it kind of is what it is. Like you can't just judge guys.
Sometimes you just got to give guys credit. I mean, Jaden Daniels is obviously had a great season, but rookie quarterback on the road, big stage. Like if you're depleted as a defense, you could either just, like you said, sit back and kind of let him dice you up, or put the pressure on him. And he delivered. And that one deep completion he had on that, I think it was a corner route or whatever, that was as perfect of a throw as I've ever seen. Sometimes you just got to give guys credit, and it's not always an equation of like, okay, you won, you're amazing, you lost, like you're a fraud, fire everybody. I just feel like there's this kind of culture in the sports discourse where it's like everyone who loses is now suddenly fraudulent and all their success is, rendered obsolete. Only one team wins the Super Bowl out of 32. It's like the team that loses, they choked on the big stage. You lose in the championship. Oh, like you're not good enough to win the big game or whatever. It's like the Lions went 15-3. They had a ton of defensive injuries and were still top 5 defense in the regular season based off DVOA. You got to look at the whole body of work and not overreact to what is most recent. So I don't hold that against Glenn.
Yeah, and then on top of that, it's a thing where like all of his players talk really well about him. Ben Johnson talks really well about him, which I don't think your OC is going to talk crap about the DC, but he went out of his way to say like he's going to be a great coach. Was brought up under Parcells, who he still talks to all the time. Then went to Sean Payton, and then is now under Dan Campbell. Like he's been under a bunch of good guys. He's improved the defense. He overcame a bunch of injuries. He is an ex-Jet, which isn't like people just assume like, oh, he's an ex-Jet, that's why we want him. It's like, no, we're giving plenty of reasons right now why we want the guy. Like at first, that's what I thought. I'll be completely transparent. About 2 months ago when I came on, I'm like, look at it. His defense isn't that great. X-Jet, that's why people want him. I was ignorant. Like it just is what it is. I didn't do research, and I wasn't really up to date on these guys because I was completely out of the game. Which I think this is Donald Hennessy says, excited to have your breakdowns back. You were missed last season. It was, dude, it broke me. Like it really broke me.
Yeah,
where I just did like Nania, like sometimes you have to have like motivation to come on and do this. And just talking about them loss after loss after loss after loss with what this year was supposed to be.
Yeah.
Maybe I was a coward and I bailed out, but I'm back now. I'll be back at least at the minimum bi-weekly for the next foreseeable future. But with Glenn, who he was brought up under, the defenses and stuff like that, he seems like a great motivator. You listen to some podcasts about him, and you do some research, like the guys he's developed from like Kirby Joseph to Marshawn Lattimore or whoever else it's been. Like he's a really good motivator, and he's kind of developed a lot of guys in the secondary under his watch. So Glenn is my number one, and that's not saying that he's some slam dunk candidate who can't miss, but Joe Brady is a guy again who's an introvert. Like, do we really want? And no offense to any nerds out there, but like, do we want that nerd to be the head coach? Do they always work out? Flores is a guy who's super volatile and sued the last team he got fired from. So it's not like there's some great list of candidates where I'm like elevating Glenn, and I think he's some can't miss guy. But for me, he is number one right now. Marvin says Glenn derangement syndrome, which I don't know if that's about like, hey, he sucks or hey, people like him. But again, I think we kind of laid it out there. If you're just going to say that we like him because of he's an X-Jet, we just gave quite a few factoids. But is there anything else you want to add to Aaron Glenn before we keep going through the chat? We went over his defenses, the DVOA. We went over the coaches he was under, the praise he's getting from players, the praises he's getting from coaches. Plenty of connections, right? You'd assume as well with being under all of those guys. So, I prefer Glenn to be on offense. Obviously, I don't want an OC to come in here and be great and then I want an OC to come here and be great and get picked up after 2 or 3 years, because that probably means we had quite a bit of success. But nonetheless, it seems like he'll have some connections where he should be able to bring in a good OC. So is there anything else you want to add to Glenn?
Yeah, I guess a few more things I would add is I think the fact that he has some scouting background experience is a positive, because it just kind of, makes him a multifaceted candidate who understands different parts of the organization. And I think that's important for a head coach, is managing the entire operation, having good relationships with every branch of the team. So, he was a scout with the Jets for 2 years, regardless of the fact that it's with the Jets. It could have been in Jacksonville, but the fact that he knows the scouting world a little bit, I think really helps his appeal as someone who's going to lead your entire team. And then I think another thing is, throughout his time with the Detroit defense, like he showed a lot of adaptability. He's known as a man heavy coordinator now. They led the league in man coverage rate this year, but that fluctuated every year. He came in, they were leaning zone in that first year. It went up the next year, down the next. So it wasn't like a static thing that he had going there, which I think is appealing, because what we just saw with the Jets was the opposite of that with Robert Saleh, and specifically defensively, but also on offense, is just an overall mentality of like, we're not going to change much. We're kind of doing our thing, and we want to find the pieces that work for that thing. And if we don't have those pieces, it's not going to work. We saw it when the defense lost players this year, had some injuries, and we saw it on offense when they just never had the quarterback really. They were very stagnant and didn't really make changes philosophically and schematically. But with Glenn, the fact that there were such significant changes with how often they ran man, how often they blitzed, things like that throughout those 4 years, it gives me the confidence that as a head coach, he can establish the mentality of a team that, we don't have something that we're sticking to. We're going to adjust to the players at our disposal, to the injuries we have, to the opponent each week. It gives me confidence he could do that. So those are a couple things I would add.
Yeah, and now kind of transitioning to Joe Brady here. He's saying he needs to be candidate number one. Is Brady your number two, if you had to say, or was it Flores, or and if not, what are your thoughts on Brady? Which again, like coming from he went offense at LSU, right? He was the passing game coordinator, right? Obviously, it helps when you have Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, and Justin Jefferson on the offense. But then after that, he gets hired 1 year right after LSU was the Panthers under Matt Rule. And then he went from did he get fired after 1 year with the Panthers or 2? And then he went to be the quarterbacks coach for the Bills for a year, and then now the OC for the Bills. And obviously they are successful. And listen, like I think a lot of fans said like, hey, the Bills lost a lot of talent in this offseason and they're not going to be great. But Joe Brady comes in, and I think he's done pretty well, obviously, as Josh Allen, but the receivers aren't anything to necessarily write home about. Amari Cooper is good, but I don't think he's made the biggest impact. But the offense is flowing. And again, Josh Allen obviously helps. But a guy who, again, innovative offensive mind, doing really well with the Bills, but is he a head coach is the biggest concern, which, is kind of like a large question. Like, what does that exactly mean? I just don't know if he's the like leader type. It's completely unproven with Brady, who he is as a man. So thoughts about Brady?
Yeah, I think it's close for me between Flores and Brady. They're kind of like mirror images, offense, defense, abrasive leader type versus nerdy schemer in the booth. So they're like completely different options. I think it's appealing to have an offensive guy as your head coach for obvious reasons we all know about. But like you said, it's just, is he a head coach? I feel like we see so many of these types now, whether it's Adam Gase, Arthur Smith. There's a lot of these coaches where, they get hired for their offensive scheming, but then, that doesn't really translate to them being a head coach, and their lack of, CEO type skills kind of, infuses the entire team and they lose that edge, sort of. Like, I feel like you look at the Dolphins and see that. Like, McDaniel's a great schemer, but that team is like, it's a soft team, and that kind of trickles down from the mentality of the head coach. So we just don't know. Maybe he is, a great leader because he doesn't really get opportunities to show that publicly. Maybe he's a great coach, but we just don't know. So I feel like that makes him a little riskier. And it also, we don't know if the Jets are going to get a chance to interview him because now they haven't done it yet. And for teams in championship weekend, they can't interview ahead of those games. It has to be after, whether they win or lose. So they might also not be willing to wait for him. So it definitely early on, I was intrigued, but at this point, we just don't really know what's going on with that.
Yeah, and it's a thing where, like, what if they're teetering between, and it seems like they're kind of teetering between Flores, between him and then between Glenn. And what if it's a thing where, hey, like, he's not available, we're going to have to kind of rush to hire one of these guys. Like, they could hold him in high regard. But yeah, we'll see. And he's like, what, he's 34 years old. And I think he's 34, 35. So he's relatively young. And we saw with Ulbrich, like, Ulbrich fell apart when he had to both be the head coach and the DC. And you're hiring Joe Brady for his offensive mind. So you're going to want him to, call the offense and be in control of the offense. But as a guy who went from LSU to 1 year as an OC to 1 year as a quarterback coach to 1 year as an OC, is he ready to be both an OC and a head coach and lead the team properly? This team like needs a kind of a kick in the ass in terms of like discipline and all that type of stuff as well. So I don't think he just come in here and be a good schematical guy and like that's the turnaround they necessarily need. And obviously, listen, like if he's a genius and they win, like yeah, the culture will kind of create itself and guys will be happy and all that stuff. Yeah. But still, like I think you need to come in here with some type of like motivation and stuff. And like just the locker room is down right now. And people are talking about DJ Reed, and I kind of criticized him, like the fact that he just consistently bitches on Twitter, and people were like, well, why not say that? It's a thing where like you came to play here. You signed, you make $10 million a year. I think it's just unprofessional to tweet about it consistently. And like, he's saying like, hey, I think somebody said like situation matters. And then DJ Reed was like, for real. And he's insinuating the Jets, but it's a thing where like you have friends here. Like he has Sauce here. He has Garrett Wilson here. So now he's leaving those guys. And it's like, yeah, the situation sucks. Adios guys. It's like, you're kind of putting your teammates in not a shitty like position, but it's just not a good thing to like read on Twitter. Like if you're Sauce reading that and he's going to leave, it's like, thanks, dude. Like, yeah, the situation sucks. Like, I'm here, but yeah, I don't know. I don't necessarily appreciate DJ Reed for how he's been on Twitter recently.
I do think on that point, like that shift. Yeah, like that is why I lean towards a guy like Flores. And as I said earlier, there are adjustments that need to be made, but that stuff just bothers me so much because like you could say whatever you want. Like those are athletes today. Every team does that. It doesn't affect what happens
Mhm.
on the field, whatever. But I just feel like it's so common with the Jets that it just points to me that there's this idea that it's okay in these players' minds to, like, you just lost the game, whether you got blown out, you choked it at the end, whatever, and you go right into the locker room. Your first instinct is not, what can I do better or how can I lift my teammates up? It's let me go online and blame somebody else outside of myself. And just the fact that
Yeah.
they do that so consistently tells me that their mindset overall isn't where it needs to be. And that's not to say they, won't make great comments later to make up for it. They won't work hard and all that. But the line between being great and being awful in the NFL is so thin because every team is so
Mhm.
talented. All these guys are great athletes, great players. They dominate in college, dominate in high school. Everyone's talented. The line between the teams who win and the teams who don't, I think, is very much made up of your mentality. Like, are you the type of guy to take accountability and figure out how can I get that one more yard? How can I get that one more pass breakup? Or are you the guy who goes right in the locker room and says, let me make sure everyone else knows this wasn't my
It's not my
fault?
fault.
So I think that is why a guy like Flores is appealing to me. But, you don't necessarily need a Flores type to do that. Maybe Joe Brady can do it. We just don't know. But I do think that trait of establishing accountability and just making sure the players are more kind of introspective than pointing outward, I think is an
Mhm.
important thing to establish, just from my
Yeah.
perspective.
Yeah, and I think DJ Reed fell off a little bit too, like this last like year or two. His first year was really good, and I think he fell off a little bit. And he was like, "Listen, the defense was a big reason why that team blew a lot of games at the end. Allowing teams to score, whether it be the Colts like back-to-back touchdowns or giving up the 90-yard drive or whatever it was to the Pats. Like the defense was a big part of that, and DJ Reed was as well. Like he had plenty of penalties, he got beat plenty of times. So like, just take some personal accountability for how it went as well this year. Like everybody just so quick to blame other people. It's the lack of accountability sometimes is crazy. And again, I just think it's kind of disrespectful to the teammates that you're leaving. Like, yeah, not a great situation. We realize that, but to consistently bitch about it on Twitter, I think it's kind of low class. I do, and you're not really going to change my mind on that. But yeah, I can see that being a reason you want Flores because they kind of needed to turn it around. And again, if he's a guy who is what he was with the Dolphins in terms of the defensive mind and all that stuff and the disciplinarian, I'm cool with it. But did he change in terms of like how he acts and stuff? That's obviously the biggest question.
Right.
So him versus I would probably say Brady 2, Flores 3 for me. But we'll talk and we'll talk about some more guys. But let's see what else we got in the chat. Keeping A-Rod. I'm assuming you're on the A-Rod gone train. Now listen, if the next coach wants to ride it out with Rodgers, I guess fine. I'm in the camp of you're starting new. I don't think it's the best situation. Listen, I don't think this team's a Super Bowl team anymore with Rodgers. So do you want to kind of be like a mid team with Rodgers and be that head coach who, whether it be Brady, Flores, Glenn, like, do you want to come into the Jets and establish a culture with a guy who's as like impactful to the locker room as Rodgers? Like, I think you want to come in and build your own culture without a guy like Rodgers, who's very opinionated and all that stuff. So what's the dead money is it's 49 million this year. And if we keep him this year, the next year it's 61 or something like that. I know they could break it up into years and stuff like that. But for me, I rather just start new, whether that be trading up and drafting a quarterback, trading down and drafting a quarterback, drafting one in the second, third round, whether that be picking up a guy in free agency and letting them compete with Tyrod, whatever it is. We could discuss those options later on. But I'm done with the Rodgers experiment. Now, again, if the next guy is adamant that he wants Rodgers and they want to try to make a run, fine. It's definitely not my preference. So I want to just clean the slate.
That's my mindset because I could see the argument where, new coach comes in, they want him, or he's a better player than whatever other options the Jets may have in an offseason where there will not be a lot of them. I understand that, but I'm just on the same page as what you said. I think this is a year where it's about turning the page, starting anew. That's not to say they're rebuilding or they can't be a wild card team or close to it, but we know they're not winning the Super Bowl this year. So given that Rodgers was brought here to accomplish that goal, even while considering the downsides that you knew came with him, because we knew there would be a lot of drama. We know he's older. We know the cap implications. And, they traded a package that maybe they didn't have to get him. You paid all those
No,
prices.
no, they definitely didn't have to. They definitely didn't have to.
We know that. Yeah.
They
So
definitely didn't have to. Yeah.
you did all that because you thought he could win you the Super Bowl. And now we
Mhm.
know you're not winning it this year. So given that, I feel like it's worth maybe a slight downgrade in production, even if it's that. I think there are arguments that him to Tyrod or whoever else you get, maybe it's not as big of a downgrade as some people think, but that's another
Hey,
discussion. But
Tyrod's last 2 drives were touchdowns, right?
they were.
There
So
you go.
to this point, like he's perfect this year, and touchdown against San Francisco. So I mean, he had a flawless season, but that's a different discussion.
And
but
he
even
would have
if
had another one too, but somebody dropped. I think somebody dropped one, or like Garrett Wilson dropped one, or whatever it was. But he was leading another touchdown drive. Yeah,
and he was good with the Giants last year. But again, different discussion. But even if he is worse by 5-6 spots on the starting quarterback ranking, whatever, I think that is worth paying for making sure that your new coach, your new GM, those are the prominent voices in the franchise. Because as long as Rodgers is here, it's Aaron Rodgers' team, regardless of I'm gonna, adapt to a new scheme, be open, whatever. It doesn't matter what he says. He runs the team if he's there, and that's just how it goes. So I think it's worthwhile, in addition to the cap aspect of it, to just wipe the slate clean and start building from the ground up. So that's my perspective on it. But if the new coach comes in and they want to do it with him, if he wants to take another pay cut, adapt to the scheme, whatever, I could see it, and it's not the worst thing in the world. But I am still in the camp of viewing the appeal of wiping the slate clean as the reason to move on from him.
Yeah, and like this comment that he's better than any other quarterback, which I probably agree with. Like he's gonna be better than anybody we bring in next year, but I just don't think we're going to win it all with him. So is it worth it when you're establishing a new culture? To me, it's not. And another thing in terms of like the locker room and stuff, like Garrett Wilson's clearly frustrated, which like lack of targets, he's had plenty. It's just about like he had large gaps in games where he just felt like he's absolutely not involved with the game plan, which is frustrating. But like, is it worth alienating a guy like Garrett Wilson as well? Because if Rodgers comes back, Devontae's coming back, and Garrett Wilson was clearly not happy with the offense. So that's another concern with the offense. And they didn't really run the ball. Like I don't know how true it is about how many times they checked out of runs. And Breece Hall didn't. I think he barely had like over 200 touches or 200 carries, whatever it was. Like he didn't touch the ball a lot. Now, let's be transparent here. Breece Hall was not great this year. He broke 7 tackles the entire year. He was mid at best, to be completely honest. But he had a little bit of frustration with the fact that he didn't touch the ball a lot. Again, different question is should he have touched the ball so much? Because again, he was just extremely underwhelming this year.
Yeah.
But yeah, what do you think about that? Like, some of the players not even, Breece. But Breece is kind of interesting because he seems to stand him on Twitter, but also be frustrated with the lack of touches. So like, was it just scheme that he was frustrated with? I don't know. But Garrett Wilson's obviously the bigger concern out of those two guys.
Yeah, I think that has an impact too. And like, I think a lot of people will disagree with this, but I really feel like the vibe we were getting towards the end of the year, where it just became like the Rodgers and Adams show, I don't think that's conducive to what the Jets are trying to do and rebuilding their culture. And I know Adams showed he still has a lot in the tank. He put up good numbers, made great plays. The guy's an all-time great and can still play. And Rodgers had his moments this year. No doubt about that. And are these guys better than Tyrod Taylor and whatever free agent you sign? Maybe. But I just feel like towards the end of the year, it's just like the Jets are trying to build something here. And it's just like Rodgers and Adams breaking all these records, walking off the field together. Like, it's not unrealistic to think that other guys in the locker room, especially someone like Garrett Wilson, who was rising as the face of this team and this offense, can look at that and be like, I'm not, totally invested in that. Like, I'm not down with that. I feel like, I don't know. Is that worthwhile? You're not winning the Super Bowl. So is that worth it when you're trying to build something new to like have these, guys just kind of doing their thing together here? And like, again, Adams was good, but he out targeted Garrett after the Jets traded for him. And, he made good plays, but considering the target volume he had, he wasn't that productive. I mean, he averaged, I just pulled up his numbers here, 7.5 yards per target. That's well below what he usually averages in his career. And it's not very good relative to the league average. So they kind of just overloaded him with throws, and it was at the cost of Garrett Wilson. And Garrett got a lot of targets too. It's not to take that away, but it was a lot of just like, all right, Garrett, here's the ball type targets. Like, okay, I'll spit you a little screen. But then when he was open on a go route or something deep, those throws were usually going to Devontae, even if it was forced. So again, like I don't want to take away from how well Adams played at times or the fact that he still has a lot left to offer, but I do feel like that vibe of like Rodgers and Adams are just running this team is, you know, it was fun to run out this string of this lost season, but do you want that as you're rebuilding? I don't think so personally. And I could also see if players in the locker room feel the same way.
Yeah, and you have to make our other star receiver, Alan Lazard, happy as well. And you know, he was I think it was like one of the first drives of the Dolphins game. I don't know what the scheme was. It was just two verticals on the right side, I believe. And Alan Lazard is wide open up the seam, and he forces a ball in the double coverage to Devontae Adams to try to get the 500th touchdown. Like that was brutal. Like, Lazard was wide open, at least from where I was sitting. So you know, obviously I'm kidding. Like we don't want to make Lazard happy. He's most likely going to get cut. But yeah, it's just a thing where like, listen, if we were a team who was a quarterback away, a decent quarterback away from a Super Bowl, yeah, run it back. I just don't think they're there at this point. I think they need to rebuild quite a few spots. Actually, really not really. I think that's actually a little bit overstated with the Jets. It's like, oh, the offensive line is terrible. Bring back AVT. Even Moses, like I'm okay. You know, he had a few injuries and stuff like that this year, but if you draft a tackle in the first, second, third round, you bring Moses back to develop, you know, develop behind, or bring Moses back to start in front of the guy you're developing. I'd be cool with that, but you have most of your offensive line in place. You have Breece, you have Garrett. I think the main spots they really need to build right. Well, hopefully they re-sign Sherwood, but I think the main spots are defensive line at this point. It's the secondary a little bit, right? You need a safety or two, potentially. You need a corner, at least a starting level corner, in my opinion. And then you need, you know, some receivers. But like the Jets are not a barren wasteland of talent. Like it's not some team you're coming into like, holy shit, they have absolutely no talent. You're talking about a starter, or we're talking about a couple of starters on offense, a couple of starters on defense. You know, obviously is Conklin back, the tight end room, the receiver room, you know, a tackle, but like it's not like it's the 2019 2021 Jets or anything like that. Like this team definitely has some talent. So I don't like people are like, oh, like this coach is going to come in here and win 4 or 5 games next year. Like no, like if this team could win 7 games with Zach Wilson with an incompetent coach, who's to say they can't win, you know, 7, 8, 9 games with a good head coach and Tyrod Taylor? Like this is not a terrible team. I think that's way overblown. I think like real Jets fans, they know that at this point.
Yeah, I agree with that. Like, I don't think it's a rebuilding situation in a roster rebuild sense. It's more of a cultural rebuild. So that's what points me towards, you know, wanting to move on from Rodgers, because, you know, even with the talent they have, I think it's realistic to say that Super Bowl probably isn't in the cards next year. But can they make a wild card, make something happen in the playoffs? I think they're definitely right on the verge of doing that if they make a couple of the right moves and, you know, they're more clutch and close games and things like that. They're right on the doorstep of doing that. So it's a more of a retool than a rebuild from a roster perspective, but it's more like culturally and the organization that needs a rebuild. So knowing that, and the fact that you're building not just to try and compete this year, but get this franchise back in a healthier state to where it can be consistently competitive for years to come, I think the value of pursuing that is worth maybe a small short-term drop-off in certain areas, whether that's Rodgers or whatever moves you may make throughout the roster. I think keeping that long-term vision of we need to establish something that's sustainable is worth slight short-term drop-offs, considering the fact that they do have plenty of talent to compete with. Like they weren't that far away from being competitive this year if they could have just closed some of these close games better, but they were just abysmal in those close games. So they're not that far off talent-wise. Definitely not.
This is about Glenn from Cadence, says 45 points, 21 points off turnovers. I was working, so I wasn't able to like listen to the entire game, but the Lions offense had like 4 or 5 turnovers, right? And obviously a lot of them being in good field position and stuff like that. So you're talking about missing whatever the number is, 4, 5, 6, starters, then a bunch of backups. You have an offense who is turning the ball over a ton, like not an easy situation. And obviously, the Commanders and Jaden Daniels have been lighting up the league the last, not the entire year, but you're talking about the last 4, 5, 6 weeks. Trust me, because I got burned by him a couple of times, like in the fantasy football playoffs. Like Jaden Daniels has been going off versus everybody. So it's not a thing like you're playing some shitty team. You have like a rookie sensation at quarterback at this point with how he's been playing recently. You have a bunch of turnovers, a bunch of injuries. So yeah, it's just a thing where people are just, oh, well, they let up 45 points. He sucks. It's just, there's no nuance to these conversations. Swolesy says Cliff Kingsbury would be a number 1 choice. 2 stops since being the Cardinals head coach. I expect he's grown and expanded. Yeah, where would Kingsbury be for you? Again, the concern is the failed 2 head coaching stops. Good offense, but is he the right leader for the job? Has he learned? And then another question about him is, hey, again, obviously he's in the championship game. Do you wait for him? Do you put all of your chips into Kingsbury? Like, hey, let's say they don't like Joe Brady. They're kind of leaning towards Flores and Glenn. They both get hired this week because they're potentially waiting to hire Kingsbury. Kingsbury then says, hey, screw the Jets. They suck. I'm taking the Bears head coaching job. Like it's obviously a risk with him as well. So what are your thoughts about Kingsbury? And I don't know have they even requested to interview him, or has he been? I don't think he's been interviewed.
I don't think he's. The report was that he doesn't want to focus on the interviewing process at all until the Commanders are done, which is why them winning this week.
Which, by the way, that's how it should be. All this stuff with the coaching searches during the playoffs and all that stuff. In my opinion, it should be after the Super Bowl where you're able to do this stuff. And obviously, it would suck for us, like more time to wait or whatever. But it's unfair to some of these teams and some of these candidates that they're not able to be interviewed or hired or whatever it may be.
Yeah, it's definitely an awkward situation for sure. And I get why teams do it because, like, this weekend's going to be over. The combine's in about a month or less than a month. Then you go straight to free agency. So like they want to get it done, but maybe you could adjust the rest of that calendar to give teams more time to get this done without interfering with the playoffs. But it's definitely an awkward situation. But yeah, the report was that Kingsbury doesn't want to focus on it until post playoffs. So now that they've advanced, he's a week further behind the curve. If they win, he probably isn't coaching. But if he were involved, I think he would be up there because, like, as the comment says, like similar to Flores, I think there's appeal to these coaches who take the time off after being a head coach for the first time, experience different stops, different cultures, and he did a great job offensively this year with Washington as well. So there's appeal there for sure with Kingsbury if he were to be involved, but at this point, it doesn't seem like that's going to happen.
Yeah, like really looking in, if he was actually interviewed and all that stuff, which I haven't heard a lot about him, that's why I haven't really considered him. Like he might be my 2, because I could see a world where I would rank him over Flores because of the volatility and all that stuff. And Joe Brady, like, listen, he's leading a good offense as well. Joe Brady has a lot more to work with than I think Kingsbury does. Like we're talking about the Commanders, and I'm not going to put words in your mouth, but I would assume most people thought before the year that the Commanders are going to be a bottom 5, if not bottom 10 team in the NFL. And they are currently in the NFC Championship game, So, Kingsbury would be relatively high on my list. And, again, hopefully he did learn. So I don't think he's a bad option. It's just how long are you going to wait for him? Maybe it's a thing where, hey, we root for the Commanders to lose. I cannot root for the Eagles, dude. I hate Eagles fans. I hate Philly fans. I hate Flyers fans. Just Philadelphia in general. I just do not enjoy that city. It's just a terrible place in my opinion. So I cannot root for the Eagles. Because it's like Eagles Bills or Eagles Chiefs. Like who do you root for at that point? In order. Let's just do that really quickly. In order.
Super Bowl matchups.
Is it Commanders you'd prefer to win it, and then Eagles, and then Chiefs, Bills? Because that's probably my order of rooting right now. Even though I hate the Chiefs at this point, some of the calls is obviously absurd.
I would say I think every good Super Bowl matchup has a good hero versus villain dynamic versus like, oh, this is cool. It's 2 new teams. Like that's nice, but like as much as we hate Chiefs, Patriots, or whatever the given villain team is at the time, like it's fun to have them there and root against them. It does add more stakes. So I think Commanders winning is preferable because like you said, if Eagles win, then regardless of who they're facing, it's like you kind of hate both of those teams. So I'd say
Mhm.
Commanders winning gives you someone to root for. That's your hero. And then on the other side, do I want the appeal of Buffalo getting there is that they could extend their Super Bowl record to 0-5. They can make it 5 straight losses, and the Jets could still have more rings than them.
Oh,
So
yeah.
I would, and plus you don't have to see the Chiefs again. It's just redundant. So I would say Commanders, Bills, preferable. Then Commanders, Chiefs, then Eagles, Bills, then the Eagles, Chiefs would be my
Yeah.
order.
Yeah, if I could guarantee the Bills lose, I would love to see them in there because I would like to see their fans miserable because that's just how I am. I like misery enjoys company. But just because just because I don't want them to win, I would like the Chiefs to get in. But it is again with I don't like Travis Kelce. The fact that Mahomes gets all the calls, you barely touch him, he gets calls. He's he's running as a runner out of the pocket, and he
And he's
gets
flopping out of bounds,
flopping out of
throwing
bounds.
his
Yeah,
arms.
it's terrible, man. So I can't really root for the Chiefs, but I hate the Chiefs less than I hate the Bills. So I'll root for Chiefs, Commanders, and hope the Commanders can pull it out. But it's like crazy with the Chiefs. Like you have how many players from the Texans came out and were like, we're playing the refs too. Like we all know what it is when you come up here. Like it's a thing where it's not just fans now. Players are saying it. So hopefully it'll change. It probably never will. Did you see Goff? I think he threw a pick and he got absolutely leveled. If that was Mahomes, dude, that guy would probably be thrown out of the game. And Goff didn't even get a
100%.
call.
Yeah.
Like it's just and refs have admitted it in interviews or maybe in private before that there is obviously a bias and we can all see it, right? Like how many seconds did that ref throw the flag after the Michael Carter interception? He waited like I
that
don't
was
know,
a bad one. Yeah.
17 minutes and then he
Made
threw
sure
the
it's like,
flag.
oh, Sauce got that. That's a pick. Yeah, let me throw this. Like it wasn't
Yeah.
a flag based on the alleged penalty. It was like this is a turning point play in favor of the Jets. We cannot allow this with the audience that's
Mhm.
watching this game. Let me throw this flag right here.
Mm-hmm. Swolsey says my whole thing is I just want an offensive head coach at all costs. So I would I'm with you in the first half of that. I would prefer an offensive head coach, but I'm not going to go at no matter the cost or no matter who it is. Like you're just going to hire a guy because he's offensive. Like what if the defensive guy is good? Like there's plenty of guys. McDermott is in the conference championship right now. Dan Quinn's a defensive guy who's in the championship game right now. Which by the way, that cycled through Twitter that hey, Dan Quinn's last game with the Cowboys, he gave up 41 points to the Packers, and now he's in the conference championship game. So don't just base it off of one game. So that's another point to make. But I'm not just going to force offense to force offense. I think that's quite silly, Swolesy, and I think you know that. But this kind of brings me to because I just actually I saw it here, so I'll bring it up to this comment from Caden. Only OC we're getting as head coach is Nagy or McCown. I really prefer it not to be Nagy. I thought he was terrible with the Bears. I didn't like anything he did with the Bears, and now, yeah, he's with the Chiefs offense under an offensive head coach. Like, what is he really doing with the Chiefs right now? I'm not sure. And then McCown is a guy like, listen, I think that's the one where people are saying like, oh, Aaron Glenn is a Jet, that's why you want him. I think the McCown thing is because he was a Jet, and that's why people want him, because he's a quarterback's coach under a offensive head coach. It's not like if McCown was an OC for the Lions and they had Flores as the head coach and he was calling the offense, then yeah, sure, but he's a quarterback's coach. Like, what are the connections he has? McCown is just way too wet behind the ears for me to sign off on him. And Nagy is gross. So if it's going to be anybody on offense, obviously I'd prefer it to be I prefer Brady or Kingsbury for going offensive, but Nagy and McCown would be, in my opinion, a failure as a head coach hire.
Yeah, like I agree with if all things were equal in a vacuum, I want the offense for sure. It's just unfortunate that it's not a great field for that right now that the Jets are choosing from. Like, would you take Nagy or Arthur Smith over an Aaron Glenn just because their offense? I wouldn't. So I wish there were better candidates, but yeah, it's just I think you got to take the best guy. And like you said, Sean McDermott, I think has done a great job as a defensive guy. Dan Quinn is there right now. John Harbaugh is not an offensive coach, so like there's plenty of examples where you don't need it. And I know people will cite those stats like 60%, 80% of Super Bowls won by offense. That's because most of the coaches are offense. The defensive coaches don't get as much of a chance to do it. It's like the same biases that lead us to think that offensive coaches are better is the same logic that leads owners to hire that way. So there are more offensive coaches. Obviously, they're going to win more Super Bowls. But again, I agree. I'd rather have offense. But I think the idea that you should force it for a worse coach is off the mark. I wouldn't do that. And in terms of McCown, like I do see the appeal. It's the biggest swing out of these hires. You're going off pretty much no track record of coaching an entire unit, like none at all. It's just Sam Darnold had a great year, which you probably attribute more to O'Connell, Justin Jefferson, O-line than McCown. So you're not really going off anything in terms of like what has he gotten out of a unit or a player. But I can see the appeal in that he does seem like he can do it. Just the fact that he throughout his playing career would fly across the country twice a week to coach high school football. He was at so many stops in the league, always constantly praised for the leadership and mentorship that he provided. So I could see him doing it at some point. And if the Jets miss out on some of these other guys, don't like these other guys, and they want to take that swing now, I could see it. But more likely, it's probably safer to like let him become an OC somewhere, see how that goes, and then do it. But I do see the potential. It's just there's nothing to really base it off of right now on field in terms of production. So it would be risky.
He might have to be an OC with the Vikings, right? Because he said he's not going to take any OC jobs this year. So it's not like he's willing to be an OC. Report. So it's like that's kind of like, I'm not thinking Ben Johnson-ish, but dude, you're a quarterbacks coach. Like take a promotion. Like that's a huge promotion to OC.
Right.
It's just quarterbacks coach, and I get it. Like Dan Campbell was a tight ends coach, right to head coach, right? Even though he's an interim for the Giant or for the
Zach Taylor was a couple of years. Quarterbacks coach as well.
Yeah, it's just like it's just really risky to me. McCarthy's James brings up, why don't you want McCarthy, offensive mind and winning track record? For me, it's like he's not the worst hire in the world. Like he wouldn't be Rex Ryan level, but I would be very lukewarm on McCarthy. And you look at his records, but there's context, right? Like he had Aaron Rodgers for years, and now he has like a really good Dallas team, and they've been okay. Like he always has winning teams. But I feel like he's an underachiever. Like, even though he has a good record and stuff, like every time I watch him, it just seems like McCarthy's teams, relative to their talent, especially in the playoffs, can kind of disappoint. So I think he's a guy who could like steady the ship for the Jets, but I just see his ceiling as like relatively limited. And I would be like very like another hire where I'd be very lukewarm on him. I'm not necessarily like 100% against him, but not some guy I'm standing for either.
Yeah, I'd put him over like a Nagy or an Arthur Smith because obviously he has a long track record of winning, at least, even if he has had great talent. But still, like, would you force a McCarthy just because he's an offensive guy, experienced, when you could get someone like even Brady I would throw in there, Aaron Glenn, Brian Flores, a guy who's much younger, seems like they have a lot more upside to like be your guy for a decade plus versus McCarthy, where it's like, he's getting older. He's flamed out in Dallas, underachiever in the playoffs. Like it just feels like you're putting a cap on yourself. Again, I acknowledge the success, and he's better than a lot of the guys the Jets have interviewed, to say the least, considering some of these names on the list. But I would just rather swing on like would I take McCown over him? Probably, just because I like the idea of like let's build our own thing and take a swing here and build it from the ground up versus something that just hasn't worked time and time, has had some success, but in terms of the ultimate goal has consistently come up short with McCarthy. So I would put him like right in the middle there between guys with some intrigue and upside versus the guys who just you should not be hiring at all.
So we have some GM discussions in here. So I want to get to a couple more head coaches before we get to some of the GM stuff. We just interviewed Joe Witt, right, who was the DC from the Commanders. And then we also interviewed the DC from the Packers as well. Two names who I don't think people have done a ton of research on, but do you have any kind of thoughts about those? Obviously, the Commanders' defense has played pretty well this year as well. I don't know a ton about those guys, again, just transparently because they're relatively new candidates, but those guys and then any others who kind of like pique your interest a little bit, or who do you think are like worth discussing?
I mean, I haven't looked into Witt too much either. And then just the rest of this list is so uninspiring. It's just not a lot. That's
Yeah.
why I really hope they get a
Like you said,
Glenn.
Arthur Smith, and I actually cringed. Like, just please God, no, not Arthur Smith.
Yeah, and it's like, and the fact that he's still probably better than a lot of these guys, like Rex Ryan, Brian. I think Brian Greasy declined their interview. Ron Rivera. It's like I don't really know what they're going at with some of these interviews. But
Yeah, some dude from like a college. Who's a guy from the college who's in like a winning team with like he's like a terrible record in
oh
college.
yeah,
Right? I forget who
Loxley.
that guy was. Yeah.
Yeah, just it's not great. It's not great. So that's why it just points me more to Glenn, because like you look at all these guys, it's like okay, offense, experience, whatever. That none of them have the well-roundedness of Glenn's resume. I think, regardless of whether they've been a coach or not, offense or defense. Just I look at him and he's clearly the guy who has the most appeal in all the different things I would look at in evaluating a potential head coach.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So now moving on to the GMs at least a little bit, and we can always transition back into the coaches if somebody brings it up. But Rohith, I'm just gonna say Rohith. I don't even know. Halaby's an Ivy League guy from a forward-thinking organization. Okay. Yeah, Halaby is an Ivy League guy from a forward-thinking organization that can get us value in the draft and free agency. Exactly the hire a GM we need. So Halaby is the guy from the Eagles. Obviously, the Jets just kind of did the whole Eagles thing with Joe Douglas, and they fired him. I think a lot of the other failures of the last couple of years have been more so on the coaching staff than Joe Douglas. Even though if you've been listening to this podcast, you know that I've had quite a few issues with Joe Douglas, specifically free agency and what he surrounded the rookie staff with. Rookie head coach, rookie OC, rookie quarterback, terrible tight ends, all of that stuff. We've talked about it. The kicker situation this year, the kicker situation his first couple of years, plenty of beef with Joe Douglas, but nonetheless, another guy from the Eagles. I believe like there's been some rumors about who the Jets are like linked to at GM, and Halaby seems to be one of the top three. And correct me if I'm wrong, Nania or Nania. I always say Nania, and then it's actually Nania. I know it's Nania, but I say Nania still.
Yeah.
So it's Halaby, and correct me if I'm wrong. It's Sullivan. It's Sullivan from the Packers, and then there's another guy I'm blanking off the top of my head.
Greenberg.
Greenberg, the assistant GM from the Bucks, right? So, do you have any like info on some of these GM candidates? Because like coaches, you kind of dig into more, and it's a little bit easier to know. GMs are really hard to know which one's going to be good, which one's going to be bad, and even with head coaches can be kind of similar, but I would say GM it's harder. It's like we wanted Joe Douglas. We wanted Saleh. I think 90% of Jets fans did, and it failed, not miserably, but it failed. So with GMs, it's almost impossible. Like I did not think there was a world where Joe Douglas didn't work out based on how much hype he had. Doesn't seem like any of these GMs have Joe Douglas's level of hype. But do you have like maybe like a top three or any info on some of these guys? I don't want to put you on a spot if you don't have a top three, but if you do, I would love to know.
Well, the first thing is I just definitely agree with what you said about GMs being harder to evaluate. And even with coaches, like you said, it's still difficult because you could look at how good is their offense, how good is their defense, but we don't really know what their impact is between them, the talent, other circumstances. So that's hard enough on its own. But at least there's a lot that you could point to. He's been in this spot and they were this successful and all that. But like with the GM or the candidates for GM, like a GM you could look at, obviously, and how well they've done. But for guys who haven't been in that spot yet, you just don't know exactly what they're responsible for. They could be from a great organization, but have nothing to do with all of the great moves that made them successful.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they influenced all of their bust draft picks. You just don't know that as an outsider. So it is very difficult to evaluate them. But I did an article a couple of days ago that I thought at least brings some sort of insight into a topic that is very subjective. And I looked at some of the top GMs in the league right now. I picked out 9 of them, and obviously that's not a definitive thing, like who's the best GM, but I picked Brett Veach from the Chiefs, John Lynch from San Francisco, Howie Roseman from the Eagles, Les Snead from the Rams, Eric DaCosta from Baltimore, Brad Holmes from the Lions, Brandon Beane from Buffalo, Brian Gutekunst from Green Bay, and Jason Licht from the Bucks. Those are the 9 successful GMs that I picked, like guys you would envy not having as a Jet, type team, and try to see if there are any trends between them that you could compare to some of these candidates that we're looking at right now. See, like, what does a great GM typically look like? And the main thing that I saw from those guys is that they're overwhelmingly from scouting backgrounds. 7 of those guys that I just mentioned came from scouting backgrounds primarily. And the only exceptions were John Lynch, which obviously that was a major outlier. They just pulled him out of the broadcasting booth. He had no experience at all. And then Howie Roseman was like a salary cap guy out of law school, a rarity for sure. But everyone else, it was scouting. So looking at this Jets, search, there are guys like Hallaby who was mentioned. It's intriguing. Like, I'm an analytics guy. I like, people who emphasize that. And it could make the Jets forward thinking or whatever. But there are teams that hasn't worked out great for. Minnesota's drafting hasn't been great. Cleveland's. It's mostly the scouting guys who ascend to being successful GMs. Then Mike Greenberg is more of a salary cap guy as well. So narrowing it down between these trends between the top GMs.
Seems like Sullivan.
Sullivan is the guy, I think. There are signs pointing to it. Gutekunst was talking about it. And the quote is longer than the one quote that was out there. He was a little more speculative, but he basically said that it sounded like he thinks Sullivan's going to leave. And he's only interviewed with the Jets and Titans to this point. Titans hired Borgonzi. That definitely is a sign that Sullivan to the Jets is something that could happen. But he's full scouting background. Packers lifer, has been there for a decade plus in a bunch of different scouting roles. He's their director of player personnel right now. And that's also one of the more common roles that these successful GMs come out of. Between those 9 guys, the most common roles that they came from were vice president of player personnel, director of player personnel, and assistant GM. That's 6 of the 9 from one of those 3 roles. And Sullivan fits that. And there are 2 other guys who kind of fit these trends, scouting background, and they came from one of those roles. There's Lance Newmark, the Commanders assistant GM, and Darren Mauji. I don't know how to pronounce it, but I'm going to go with that. Broncos assistant GM. So those are the 3 guys who kind of line up with what typically turns into a successful GM. And there are outliers. You could get the next Howie Roseman, you could get the next John Lynch. Doesn't have to go this way, but it's overwhelmingly scouting guys who turn out to be successful long-term GMs that consistently make the playoffs, have winning seasons. And those are the 3 guys who come from scouting backgrounds and are fit the mold of what typically works. And another thing that I noticed was none of those 9 guys that I mentioned are former GMs. They're all first-time GMs in this role that they're currently in. So that could speak to maybe there isn't as much value to hiring a Dimitroff, a John Robinson, a Grigson, one of these guys who has been a GM before. Because you look at the best.
Why are
GMs,
they interviewing Grigson? Like, what are we doing? The guy single-handedly made Andrew Luck retire. Like, what are we doing with that one? Just that is absolutely brutal. But I think it's a great job. I think that's a reason to subscribe to Jets X Factor right there. Like the info you just gave about the GMs and the trends and stuff. Because I didn't know that personally until you just said that. It's like, hey, you based on the history, you want a guy who's been involved in scouting and player personnel and all that stuff. And Sullivan is that guy. As you're talking about Hallaby, and Greenberg are more, you said Greenberg's a cap guy and Hallaby's like the analytics guy. So like out of the 3 guys who, are rumored to be the top candidates for the Jets, I guess we root for Sullivan. Would you prefer Hallaby? Do you have a preference between Hallaby and Greenberg, or do you not really have a preference there?
Well, I mean, given this study that I did, I do think it pushes me towards a Sullivan because I like the idea of being outside the box, forward thinking with analytics or whatever. And I don't think again, like this doesn't make it so you have to follow this mold. It can work doing something different, but just knowing that most of the GMs that you would want to replicate came from scouting backgrounds, I think it just points to maybe that's what you got to stick with. Like the GM at the end of the day is responsible for making the picks, making the trades, making the signings. So they should know how it's going to affect what happens on the field and,
Mhm.
not be delegating that to other parties. So I think you do need a scouting guy at the top. I think that that's preferable. So I would say that I would lean towards some of these guys with scouting backgrounds versus your Halibis and Greenbergs. But like I said, it doesn't rule them out if they show that they have the capability of doing it.
So now, out of the top three, if it is Hallaby and Greenberg as along with Sullivan. Sullivan says no, screw you guys. And then it's Hallaby versus Greenberg. Do you have a preference between those two guys, or do you not really? You just prefer a guy in pro personnel and scouting and all of that stuff?
I mean, Hallaby seems to have a good reputation, and again, I'm an analytics thinker. I think there's an edge to be gained in that area because a lot of teams still don't value it to quite the extent as other teams. So I think if he establishes that, it would be intriguing. But at the same time, like, you can't just be a math run team with no football side to it. You don't want to be like, that's kind of what put the Browns where they are. Like, they've had a couple of decent years, but I don't think you want to be in their spot right now. The Vikings drafting
John Izek.
John Idzik didn't work out. So, like, we've seen examples of cap guys, analytics guys not working. So but it goes the same thing for scouting. But so I would lean scouting guys, but I don't know. Halby comes from Philadelphia. Howie Roseman's right hand man. Maybe he could follow in his footsteps. I guess I kind of lean towards that. But
Okay.
I mean, I definitely like scouting.
Yeah. Okay. So let's go Sullivan and Glenn Perry. And I think people have said that Sullivan and Glenn had like played together one year in the NFL or something like that. Did Sullivan play in the NFL as well? I'm pretty sure that they crossed paths at some point. I could be
I'm
wrong
not
on
sure
that.
about that one.
I could be wrong. Do not take that as gospel. I 1,000% could be wrong. Arnar said this is better than other channels whining about Gruden and McCarthy, like whining that they want them or whining that we're interviewing them. Again, McCarthy I'm lukewarm on, and Gruden kind of sucked with the Raiders, right? And then he had a whole scandal. Like, Gruden hasn't been like a good head coach in 20 plus years, right? Like, am I mistaken about his time with the Raiders? I don't understand why Gruden would be some hot candidate necessarily. Like, it's a thing where, like, hey, Rex was good in 2010, let's just bring him back. Like, Gruden was good with the Bucks and stuff like that, but he didn't have a overwhelmingly successful stint with the Raiders. If anything, to my remembrance, I could be wrong, I think he kind of failed with the Raiders. Like, they were never
pretty awful
with him, right? Yeah. So, like, what is the Gruden
the second run?
I'd rather hire freaking Rex and just go down, and at least it'll be fun. It'll be miserable at the same time. It'll be exciting. But Gruden, like, no. And again, McCarthy, I'm just lukewarm on. I rather have him than some shitty names, like you said, than Nagy and whoever else, Nagy and Rex and
I predicted
and
Nagy
Rivera,
my initial predictions a couple weeks ago.
God.
I don't know if I'm
shoot me
gonna move
right
off
in the.
of it. It's like, I don't know. There's just, what if Glenn takes New Orleans, Flores, Says is a DC. Jets are like, all right, we'll go offensive experience guy. We'll take Nagy. I feel like I might move towards Glenn as a prediction. It feels like there's some momentum towards that, but I don't know. My instinct is telling me just take the least inspiring yet realistic option. That kind of points
you're just trying to prepare yourself for disappointment.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's just that'll be a thing where it's just like, how do we keep doing this if it's Nagy, man? It's just I need some hope. Like, at least McCown would be exciting, but Nagy is just so uninspiring. But I'm gonna knock on wood. That is not a good prediction from you. Shame on you, Nania. Don't even put that into the ether. Bernard says he wants Rodgers. We talked about this before. I rather not. If it's a thing where I thought they can actually win a Super Bowl, then sure. But the dead cap going up, this year versus next year, if you keep them, more of a hit. Rather not. A coach establishing a new culture with a guy who's as polarizing as Rodgers. Rather not. Develop a young guy, go with Tyrod, whatever it may be. So. What Kingsbury has done with a rookie quarterback who's awesome, yes, McLaurin, but the rest of the is two mid running backs, the ghost of Ertz and nothing but Jack. Yeah, no, dude, he's really impressed. I would undoubtedly, if you say whose offensive production has been more impressive, Kingsbury versus Ben Johnson, like it's Kingsbury for me all day over Ben Johnson for what they've done at least this year. And I can go back and watch their schemes and all that stuff and be like, no, I'm an idiot, it's Ben Johnson. But based off of the team and their success and then what he's working with, like, what if Kingsbury had the offensive line, Amon-Ra, St. Brown, the tight ends they do, all this stuff? Like, I would definitely say that what Kingsbury has done has been more impressive than Ben Johnson, at least this year specifically, and at least the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, I think so. And like that's the most basic equation you could use for coaching, I think, is results minus talent. Like how did what you get compare to what the talent should have gotten? So I think in that respect, Kingsbury's more impressive. But like you said, like you could watch the Lions and be like, maybe some of these guys aren't as talented as we thought, and the coaching is just sublime from Ben Johnson. But just from the out, I'm not saying he's not great. Like he's still probably like top 5 offensive schemer mind in the league right now, however you want to categorize that. But it's just from a head coaching perspective, I don't feel it. I'm trying to go off of that more with evaluating coaches this year. Like, can I look at that guy and picture him being what Dan Campbell is now, or Dan Quinn, or like any of these successful coaches? Can you picture them in those shoes? And I just don't know if I see Ben Johnson doing that, but I see Aaron Glenn and I feel like I can picture it. So that's kind of my mindset.
Lawrence says, do you think it's possible we're avoiding interviews with the candidates like Cohen and McCarthy because Glenn wouldn't be more of a consensus? Like, I can see the McCarthy thing, but like he's had success and all that stuff. Again, I just think relative to the talent on his team, he's kind of disappointed, especially late in the season. And Cohen's Liam Cohen, right, from the guy from the Bucks.
Yeah,
everything I've read about him, like I'm not overly impressed. He's been OC for 1 year there, right? Maybe 2, but I believe it's 1. He just doesn't have the longest
1 year with the Rams in 22, which was not
okay. So 1 year with the Rams and then 1 year. Yeah, like Cohen's a guy. I don't think you like Cohen's some slam dunk prospect. You're not gonna interview him over Glenn. Now McCarthy, I guess I can kind of see what you're saying, but I don't think so. Like they're interviewing everybody at this point. And again, Cohen's not a guy who I would really love. And then who's the other guy who people who's the Slowick is a guy who a lot of people want as well. And his offense fell off like pretty heavy this year. And he's a guy who's relatively inexperienced as well. So I'm not a Slowick guy at all either. But I'm kind of with Swolsey here, who says, I think the 33rd team is doing PR work for their own business. Like, I think it's a thing where they have a bunch of these candidates and like, hey, this guy interviewed, like they're building like a resume for some of these guys and stuff. Like, I think they're doing favors to people and stuff. I don't love that. It's like a social media, Twitter kind of website, whatever it is that's running it with Tannenbaum. Like, I think especially when you listen to Tannenbaum talk, it doesn't seem like the smartest individual at sometimes. So I definitely don't love that they have the 33rd team running the search, but the amount of interviews they've done, like, it's just been, and some of the guys I've interviewed have just been absolutely brutal. Again, the guy from college and Rivera, and like, why is Rex getting an interview? Like, what are we talking about here? He was. Do people not remember that one? He was good 15 years ago, and this is the same individual who put Mark Sanchez behind a bunch of backups to win a preseason game. Like, that's all you have to say for how dumb this guy was. Like, and there's plenty of examples of how bad he was as a head coach, specifically towards the end. And listen, he went to Buffalo and he failed there too, got fired after 2 seasons, right? With Buffalo. Like, it just absolutely not. So some of the candidates are bad. Like, Rex would be fun and all that stuff, but like, one, he looks the teeth, dude. I don't know if I could just see the teeth every interview. Like, just my God, dude. Like, just what are you doing, dude? Like, I drink some coffee or put some stains on there or whatever it is. But like, you like blinding. You have to wear sunglasses to interviews with him. So what's up, Yoshi? The NFL will not allow Gruden to be head coach. I think he could. I think he's able to be, right? And I don't think McCarthy got interviewed by the Jets. He got interviewed by the Jets in 2019, right? But not this time. Facts, misplaced excuses. I'm gonna assuming that you're agreeing with us. Let's see. I'll keep running through the chat. I'm always behind in it. That's why if Flores isn't hired, it will be the same thing all over again. So you're saying Flores should be hired no matter what. Again, if he learned from his past, fine. It's impossible to know that. I wanted McCarthy the year we got that bum Adam Gase. Like Adam Gase, like Nagy would be, at least with Adam Gase, like there is semblance of like, hey, he's an offensive genius. It didn't work out with the Dolphins, but maybe there's a shot in hell that he's so smart that it just works out here. I would say that I was more and listen, I did not like the Adam Gase hire, but I would like Adam Gase in 2019 more than I would like Nagy in 2024.
Wow,
Because at
really?
least there's a shot, dude. Yeah,
Yeah.
like I couldn't do Nagy. Like at least Gase like had a reputation of being a genius and all this stuff. Like Nagy just absolutely gross to me. I just could not do Nagy.
Yeah.
That's it, Joe. We're not Super Bowl contenders. We're not keeping AR sets the team back. Yeah, it's just, again, establishing a culture and what you're going to win an extra 2-3 games with him, maybe win 9-10, and maybe you do get to the wild card of the playoffs and get eliminated or win one game in the playoffs. But I just don't think it's worth it for that chance. Like that's the ceiling maybe of this team is to get to the divisional round with Rodgers next year if you plug a couple of holes and all that stuff. But I just don't see it working out with a new coach. Now, if Salo is back for one more run, whatever, like if that was the alternative world we're living in, then yeah, fine. It's not worth it to me. I rather just clean slate for sure. Let's see. Tyrod's a fine bridge quarterback. Dude, Tyrod has been fine over his career. Like he was solid with the Bills. He goes to the Chargers, about to stop or start there. He gets his lung punctured by a doctor. You know, people bring up his Giants tenure and like they only won 4 or 5 games, whatever it was. But look what he was working with. Like I watched the film of him every game that year, and he was under pressure immediately. Like the entire season, he got injured. Yeah, he got hit all the time. There are some problems with Tyrod. Like he could be a little bit of a check down king. And, then there's some other issues. And I forgot off the top of my head, but I did a review on him last year. But like, I'm fine with him starting next year. Do you have like a preference yet on what you feel like the Jets are going to do at quarterback this year? Obviously, that's always a big topic for the Jets. Is it a thing like in no world do I want to trade up for Sanders? Like maybe you trade up for Cam Ward and sit him behind Tyrod for a year or something like that, or do you bring in a guy in the second, third round? Is it Milrow? Like I'm not so deep into the draft at this point, but is it just a vet? Is it Justin Fields? Like, what are you kind of feeling the Jets are going to do at quarterback? And then kind of like, what's a preference? Even though I know I'm putting you on a spot, it's very early for like quarterback preference talk right now. But
yeah, I mean, I do think the one thing that I feel confident in saying is that I think it'll be somewhat of a punt year at quarterback. It just doesn't feel like there's anything worth, investing heavily in. They didn't land high enough in the draft to select a quarterback without trading, a viable quarterback. And even among those quarterbacks, it would be questionable if that was worth, making the pick. They have Tyrod under contract already. They still have Travis, who knows what's going on with that injury at this point, but he is there. And you would assume that hopefully he's good to go for this season. And then there are guys out there like wild card types you could trade for, like a Fields. Who knows what'll happen with McCarthy? Although, Sam Darnold's last couple games, maybe Vikings just roll with JJ, but I feel like it'll be that type of quarterback room. Like stick with Tyrod. Travis is there, and then maybe they add some sort of like roll the dice type guy into the mix. I just don't see them doing anything big because there's nothing that would be worthwhile on this year's market for doing that.
Mm-hmm. Lawrence brings up Teddy Bridgewater. Some other people brought him up. They have Tyrod. Why he's under contract. Why are we bringing Teddy Bridgewater? We have one vet. I wouldn't do that. Personally. And then some people brought up Jordan Travis as well. This is one of those things where I think like Jets fans are, and in some situations like, hey, we suck, whatever. But I think when you have players who people don't really know about, or even if they do know about them, we tend to lean towards the positive. And like the positive scouting reports, and it's like, hey, if Jordan Travis wasn't injured, he'd be a second round pick. I didn't see that. When I watched his film, limited arm, limited going through reads, athleticism, but more with his feet than his arm. Real severe lack of accuracy sometimes, just throwing balls 10 feet over guys' head. Yeah, like you give him a shot, but I think he's a guy who he was a 5th round pick, right? Maybe he'd have been a late 3rd, early 4th if he wasn't injured, but I don't see Jordan Travis as some savior. I severely disagree that he'd be a 2nd round pick if he was healthy. I think that's just Jets fans trying to lean towards positivity.
Yeah, it's definitely not. It's not something you should place stock into as like, we have this guy, so that's our developmental quarterback. But it also just doesn't feel like there's a worthwhile attempt. Like, they have a lot of holes, not a lot of holes to fill. Like we said earlier, they're not they're not the Giants or the Raiders, but they have a whole defensive line, interior D line to fill out. They have a cornerback spot that's going to be open. They have, a right tackle spot that doesn't have a long-term starter. So like, do you want to waste, or not waste, but use a second round pick or third round pick on a quarterback when you want to try to build up this roster first and then maybe invest in a guy later when you're more solidified. I just feel like that is probably the route that they're going to take.
Solzy makes the point of that's the thing. The candidates remaining, you have to choose between prioritizing culture or performance. Variable was the only one I viewed that gave you both. Like, so I think he's probably labeling Glenn as like a culture guy, but I think Glenn has had performance too. Like Nania brought up the numbers, and I said it, like he improved all 4 years. He was with a really bad defense, and he had some. He was you said top 5 DVOA this year, or
fifth best,
top 10.
Yep.
With however many guys on IR, and I think it was like 5 starters on IR. And again, your best player on defense, linebackers, 2 corners, so like
even Anzalone, who came back, was playing through like the what I forget what it was. I think bicep, some sort of severe injury that he came back and fought through.
So that's why he is my number one. It's because I think there is performance. A lot of people talk about him, in terms of the culture, and then not only on top of that, like, hey, whatever he's on with the Lions in terms of the culture, it's the coaches he's been around too. It's the Parcells, it's the Paytons, it's the Campbells. So that's the reason is he's my number one at this point. So with all the other guys, again, I think they're just extremely volatile. Let's see, 100%. I think all coaching positions should have to wait. I think it's bullshit that it doesn't really. I think it's crazy that they force guys like, hey, what if Cliff Kingsbury was his ideal spot? Let's just say in some world, the Jets were his absolutely ideal spot, and they wanted him, but they didn't want to risk losing their second guy, and now he doesn't get to be a head coach. And then, hey, years down the road, it never comes up for him again. He doesn't get a head coaching opportunity. Like, you can ruin a guy's career because he can't get a head coaching job because he's in the playoffs. Like, I do think it's extremely flawed with how that works out. So. I would love the Bills to have lost 4 Super Bowls and 4 playoff games to Mahomes, let them live in eternal misery. Yeah, you can't root for an AFC East team. I would say the Bills is the team that I hate the least out of the teams in the AFC East. The Dolphins are undoubtedly my one. I just hate Dolphins fans more than any other fan base. But yeah, the Bills, like, again, I don't hate them. I think if I wasn't a Jets fan, I would really have no problem with the Bills, but they're in our division. So I would love to see them live in misery. Some people asked about Mike McCarthy. We got into that a little while ago, so I'm not sure what point this was in the podcast. Obviously, it was 30 minutes ago, but I'm not sure where we were. So either scroll back or you're about to hear some McCarthy talk. I'm not sure. Okay, I'm gonna keep whipping through the playoffs. McCarthy comes up short in the playoffs. Really, Jets haven't won more than. Yeah, I get it. I get that he's like the high floor candidate. And again, it's why I don't hate him as a coach. It's just something that I'm not inspired by with McCarthy.
And that's just not the logic you could use for any decision that you make. Like, the Jets haven't done anything at all the past 15 years. So does that make anyone who's accomplished more than the Jets viable for them? Like, you just got to pick the best players, best coaches. It doesn't matter what the Jets have done. That's not relevant in this discussion. You don't settle
you want
for
the best candidate
just because, like, we're awful, so let's be mediocre. That's okay. Like, you're still trying to be the best and win Super Bowls, win championships. So anytime, whether it's this specific thing, or anytime someone brings up, the Jets are they haven't made the playoffs in 15 years. Arthur Smith won 7 games. He's an upgrade for them. Whatever it may be. Like, it shouldn't be a factor what the Jets have done. Just make the right decision. It doesn't really matter to me.
Yeah, it's about like, it's like a mixture of the highest floor versus the lowest, or sorry, the highest ceiling versus like the lowest floor. It's a mixture. Like, you can prefer McCarthy. Like, I'm not telling everybody to not prefer him. Like, you could, and I get people leaning on, hey, he wins games, he's been in the playoffs a lot, and I want to get there. That's fine for you as a fan. Me personally, I want the guy who I feel like has a really high ceiling. It could be a great coach. And I think that's Glenn, whereas McCarthy kind of like know what he is. And yeah, maybe you bring him to the playoffs, but I want to shoot for a little bit more than what McCarthy is. And again, he's had really good teams with the Packers and with the Cowboys, so just not necessarily inspiring. Yoshi asked, what do you guys think of Dimitrov, the ex Falcons GM? Seems like at first he kind of hit, traded up for Julio Jones. He built a pretty good team. But then he fell off the last couple of years after the Super Bowl, had some losing seasons. Some podcasts and things I listened about him is like that he didn't prioritize, like he kind of prioritized the Super Bowl team and extended guys like who were the running backs that year? It's like Coleman and who was the main running back on that? Yeah, Freeman. Like and he didn't really kind of establish like a new team or a new image after the Super Bowl loss, and he kind of like hung on to the past a little bit. So I like the fact he's experienced. I like the fact that hey, he brought a team to the Super Bowl. He had a pretty good roster there. Obviously, it helps that I believe they already had Matt Ryan, or they hit on Matt Ryan. That's probably why they won so many games, and his record's kind of decent. I think he'd be okay, but I would say like a little bit more than lukewarm on him. Like I think lukewarm is, let's say, a C plus. Maybe Dimitrov would be like a B minus C plus higher. I'm not like hot on him, but I wouldn't necessarily hate it at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, I like his tenure. I think it's a good, like, long-standing track record of success. I mean, his first 10 years there, 6 playoff appearances, 6 double-digit win seasons. Like, he had a long track record of success, drafted pretty well to build the core of that team. However, considering, the stuff I laid out earlier, none of the top GMs in the league are second-timers. So I don't think, in the way that having an experienced head coach might have value, I don't know if that carries the same weight with the GM. It probably more so means that, if they were a great GM, they probably would still have their job, because I think teams are more willing to stick with GMs for the long haul than they are with head coaches. And they want a guy to just stick there for a decade plus, 2 decades. So when that's not happening, it's a little bit concerning, especially he hasn't really been super active or like super high on the totem pole since then. So yeah, I would say middle of the road, like you. He had a really long, solid run with the Falcons, but I think it's probably the better route to go for the next guy up versus like former GMs.
And like you said, a lot of the GMs who are successful now in the NFL were not recycled,
Right.
GMs. So that's another point. Bus says backup quarterback position. There's plenty of problems with Douglas, the defensive line, Hassan Reddick, JFM, Huff, all of the stuff we can talk about. But Corley over Brian Thomas Jr. was a first round pick. So how did he pick Corley over Brian Thomas Jr.? And now the fact that Saleh and Douglas were basically seemed like they were creaming their pants over getting Corley, and then they used him like 3 times this year. That was a concern, because like, what are you guys doing? You'd assume that if you're drafting a guy who is going to be like more of a yak threat, you'd have some type of like, no, I'm not going to say build the offense around him, but hey, this guy's primarily yak. He's not necessarily developed in other areas. Do we have a plan for him to get 3, 4, 5 touches a game? And they didn't really do anything with him. Now, obviously, when he came into the Texans game, he kind of hurt himself there. But yeah, a little bit concerning with Corley. We'll see. The receiver room, assuming Devontae Adams to be gone, they have nothing at 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 right now. They're getting a little rid of Lazard. I think Gibson's a scrub. He made his kind of career off of one play in his first game, has done nothing since but muff the ball and not be impressive, in my opinion. So their receiver room is probably their biggest rebuild at this point, right? Like, that and defensive line are 2 of the biggest rebuilds for the Jets. Secondary, tight end definitely needs some work as well. But let's see. I don't think Nania brought this up. I'm assuming he would have if he knew. But did your study show how many successful GMs played football at some level? I don't think a lot of. Well, I don't know. Do you have any info about that? I'm assuming not.
Yeah, I didn't note it down, but I definitely was like, taking mental notes of it while I was looking at it. It did tend to, like, I don't think any of them played in the NFL, but other than Lynch, obviously. But outside of him, I don't believe any of them played in the NFL, but most of them played college football, especially among the scouting guys. Roseman didn't play, but among the scouting guys, I believe all of them played college at.
Oh, nice.
Don't quote me on that, but all or most of them played college.
Okay.
But I don't think any NFL.
Domsey said Brian Gain was the GM who played with Glenn. Okay, so it was Brian Gain, not Sullivan. So I wonder if it's a thing where like they want Glenn so bad they'll let him pick the GM, or if they pick Sullivan, like who is Sullivan linked to? Like I don't, we don't really know. So that's I don't know if anybody has links to Sullivan and head coaches and knows about it in the chat, drop it, because I don't really know who he's connected to.
They interviewed that Packers DC Jeff Hafley. So
okay, yeah.
That's a possibility, but another uninspiring kind of like, why is that name in there type of head coach?
Yeah. Unless it's a thing again where somehow obviously these guys talk, right? Like they know each other. They don't have to be on a team to know each other. They could have ran into each other in Indy at the scouting combine and talked and really liked each other, had a slumber party and all that stuff. So Gruden this is from Peter Yeti. Gruden was 64-80 in 9 seasons after the Super Bowl win, which was 23 years ago, only 2 playoff seasons. No thanks. And he recently sucked ass with the Raiders and had a lawsuit against them. Like, what is I don't understand the Gruden hype like at all. People talk about him. I think it's because he's on TV. He's funny. He's a good personality. The spider Y2 banana, all that shit. But like, what is the appeal with Gruden? It's just like, it's crazy to me. Okay. Bus says I only tolerate Rex Ryan because we both like feet. It's a weird fetish that people have. I don't know, man. It's just feet are fucking nasty to me. R&R, my bad. He says I misread what he said. I am against McCarthy and Gruden. I'm not sure what I said, but yeah, I'm not for either one of those guys either. Tyrod, Fields, Travis, and a rookie is the move. I'm gonna argue against that. I don't think you want Fields, Travis, and a rookie. And again, Travis they're saying he might not even be healthy next year. I think that's too crowded of a quarterback room. I think you want 3. Tyrod, Travis, Fields. Okay. Tyrod, Travis, and a rookie. I prefer rookie. I don't really think Fields is the answer here. But yeah, I think 4 is too much. You'd agree with that 4 is probably too much at that point? I think that's too much of like.
Yeah, unless it's like a situation of day 3 quarterback and he kind of competes against Travis for one roster spot, or maybe Travis just isn't healthy and the rookie takes his spot. Travis is on IR again. I could see that, but I do think the vibe of this is what's going to happen. I don't think you're going to see the Jets add their quarterback of the future this offseason. Just Tyrod's under contract, so I don't think they're going to add another Tyrod type, like a veteran 30+ backup stopgap quarterback, because there's just no reason to, because he's there already. So you'd be allocating 2 roster spots and 2 salaries to the same role pretty much. So I think that they'll look for like a Fields type who maybe can be a decent backup, but also has some upside. And then, Travis is there. Maybe they throw in a rookie. So I do think that's what it's going to look like though.
Yeah. Okay. Swolsey says, just imagine what this team could have been if Monken went. And Monken could be another guy who, like, hey, it's a thing where he's a great OC, but not the best head coach. But like you look at his tenure with the Bucks and what he did there, and then what he did with Georgia, and now what he's doing with Lamar Jackson. And I know Lamar Jackson had a fumble and all that stuff in that game, but can we really blame that game on him? Like, yeah, he was part of it, but dude, Mark Andrews, those last 2 drives are just absolutely brutal. So I think he's done a lot. He really made Lamar Jackson actually a really solid passer, if not a great passer, the last 2 seasons there. So
we just got a report from Ian Rappaport that Aaron Glenn is set for an in-person second interview with the Jets, and that this is his first one, which Rappaport is saying is significant.
Does that move your meter even more towards Glenn over the Nagy conversation, or did you expect this?
I think it's significant. I think it's interesting, the fact that he would go there first, and the Lions losing is very significant in this, which I wasn't really thinking about it while watching, but in hindsight, now that we're talking about how uninspiring a lot of these coaches are, maybe I should have rooted more heavily for it, because now this has the opportunity to happen, versus if the Lions won, you don't know how long it would be till you could even talk to Glenn. Like, would you wait it out for him, put all your eggs in on him, miss, and then you have to get Arthur Smith or something? So, but now in person this week, before anyone else gets a chance to get him, if he's the Jets' top guy, if he likes the Jets as much as some reports have claimed, then
that he's their
maybe it gets done. And does he, like you just said, does he get the say on the GM? Does he get hired first? So that's very interesting.
I would argue that, like, for right now for the Jets, that I think the head coaches, like, they have talent. Like, if they had absolutely no talent, I would say maybe GM is more important. But right now, I think head coach is more important. And I'm not saying that Glenn should get to pick the GM, but like, is it so right that the GM always picks the head coach? Like, why can't the head coach pick the GM? I mean, like, I don't think that's necessarily an issue, even though I don't think Glenn should necessarily have that power. Like, he hasn't necessarily proven it, but if that's what he's going to say, like, hey, I want to pick my own guy, and that's what's going to make him pick the Jets, I'm okay with it. Like, link up with a guy who you want and who's going to build the team as you see fit. So it's interesting. But yeah, if I had to bet on it, I think it's going to be, Glenn at this point. So Swolsey said, I'd rather take a swing and miss.
To visit the Saints, Rappaport says. So Jets first, but Saints is lined up.
The thing with the Saints is, like, yeah, he played there, he coached there, but their situation in terms of their cap and talent is so much worse than the Jets, in my opinion.
Yeah,
their team is barren with no cap going forward. So I just see the Jets as a much better opportunity. And I'm not trying to be biased, but I think they have a lot more talent and a lot more cap flexibility in upcoming years after they take some hits with Devontae and Rodgers this year. So I'm not trying to bring this up to be political or anything like that, but Wood is in DC for the inauguration, which I don't know if he's just saying that or if he's just assuming that because of the connections to him and Trump. But like, is he there and can he even interview? Like, is he going to be there to interview Glenn today? Like, I really don't know if that's true or not, but you're hoping he would be there for the interview, right? I don't.
There is a picture of him there. I just saw. So
okay,
so he is there.
Yeah. All right. So is he not interviewing? So did they say Glenn is interviewing today, or maybe he's interviewing later tonight?
They didn't say the date in that team in the post from Rappaport. Just says
so it could be
is set for one.
DC is an hour, jet ride from. His helicopter can take him right there for the interview if he needs to. I'm sure. So he could be there tonight or tomorrow. I'm sure. What is up to Danger Zone, which I'm assuming is Dano, I believe, because Dano's usually in here. What's ABT situation? Is he signed? If so, do you think they should extend him? He's not signed, right? So I think you extend him. I think you give him. Now, how long is the deal and all that stuff? I don't know, but he's a guy who's been a good Jet. Unfortunately, he's been injured, but when he plays, he's solid. He's pretty solid this year. So I would definitely look to re-sign him, not necessarily extend him, but re-sign him because they can't extend him.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because he does have that injury history, which I do think you have to account for in his value, but on field, he's obviously. He had a great year this year, so it's an interesting discussion.
Dom C says Halfley is definitely someone that was brought in to speak with either at the recommendation of Eric Sullivan or to get more intel on him. I could see that too. Like, hey, there's no reason for this interview, but it's a thing where they're asking him consistently about Sullivan. Then it makes sense if they're trying to gather more info. And people are saying like, hey, I think that's it's going to be. Sullivan with Glenn. The thing is, they just don't really have a connection. So I'm not sure if that's going to happen. But again, I'm okay with the coach picking the GM. I don't think it's as big of a deal as some people think. I just, as long as they're in sync, I think that's the most important part. So however it works out, it works out.
Yeah, I don't think the order of that matters. I just think as long as one side is making that selection versus an arranged marriage, then you're getting a synchronized pair that's on the same page. Mm-hmm. So I don't think it matters.
Mm-hmm. He was on the 5th year option this year, right? ABT. It's not next year. He was on the 5th year option.
It's 25. So yeah, he is under contract on that 5th year option, but they can talk that extension with them. I'm assuming that's going to be a topic.
I'm pretty sure this came up my last stream, and then I looked it up, and I didn't think he was under contract this year. But initially, I thought he was extended that 5th year, but that was this year. But I don't know. Okay, so he's under contract for next year. So yeah. I wouldn't extend him then because he's had 1 year of being healthy. In his 3 previous years, he wasn't healthy. 4th year healthy, mostly. So I wouldn't extend him. I would wait to see
two out.
Oh yeah. Sorry,
but this year he was banged up. So. I mean, mostly healthy, but there wasn't perfect.
Mm-hmm. So I would wait though, because 2 years of season-ending injuries, I wouldn't necessarily extend him. Now maybe there's a thing where, hey, through 8 weeks he's playing really well. Okay, but I want to see a little bit more before we extend him. But I'm glad they have him under contract. So you're talking about a right tackle probably a receiver or two, a tight end or two, some guys in the secondary defensive line. But again, it's not a barren wasteland. Yes, sir, branding, but still call me Dano. No worries. Branding. Okay, so you have Danger Zone the show, so make sure to listen to Danger Zone. Obviously, I could see in the or at least try it. I'm not gonna recommend Dano because I never listened to it. So give him a try. At least give Dano a fair shot. Maybe he sucks. Maybe he's great. You never know. Better late says, so great to hear you guys together again. Yeah, I've again hiatus. I do not plan on taking that long off ever again. One show in the last 4 months, I think I've done. Now we're back into it. It's been a while for me. Great to see y'all. Yeah, what's up to Harvey? Hafley was interviewed because he's a credible head coach candidate for Sullivan if he's hired. Either way, I think Nania seems to think that there's not the longest resume of success with Hafley. But nonetheless, GVH says, do the Jets have all of their picks this year? They traded a 2025 third for Devontae. The Jets they don't have all of their picks, but I think they like double up in the third or double up in the fourth or something. I forget exactly their picks. I haven't looked into that at all. But what are
the third rounder is gone, but they have one from Detroit, and they also have an extra fifth from Pittsburgh.
So they have 1, 2, 3, 4, 4, 5. Is that what you said? Or am I?
Yes, they have the first 4 rounds. They have 1 each, and then they have 2 in the 5th.
Okay,
2 in the 6th. No 7th.
Exciting. 2 in the 6th, you said? That is,
yeah.
I can't wait for people to yell about me at some guy in the 6th round because he consistently fell to them in their mock
quarterback who was, you pick him in the 2nd round and he's there in the 6th. Like, clearly the whole league is missing out on something that Pro Football Network's mock draft simulator knows, but they don't.
It's I'll be really honest with you. I think a lot of people's draft opinions come from the simulators, and this guy consistently falls to me in this round, and he's a position of need, and that's why I know his name, and that's why I want him. Like that's the depth of people's research.
That's a lot of it, because like we form like our opinions based on like there's so much information for months of like what a guy's reputation should be. There's this big board, that mock draft, and like this stock report, but the draft is the one indicator of reality, like how they're actually looked at. So it doesn't matter what the mock draft said. That's not really based on anything. The draft is what their actual value is. So no one's actually a steal. If they fell for a reason. So yeah, that's always interesting.
Yeah, exactly. Peter says, I know it's a long way to the draft, but I'm hoping they go high at right tackle. So I'll wait to like really give my opinion on some of the guys in the draft this year. But from what I'm hearing, the Campbell guy, Campbell.
It's today. The interview is today, according to Jeremy Fowler from ESPN.
You think it's a thing where like they can hire him like today, like not let him leave type of deal? Or do you think like, does he definitely go to the Saints? Like, did this happen quickly? Like, I wonder how quickly this all kind of picks up steam.
I could see it because there just hasn't been a lot of steam for anything else, right? But it kind of feels like there's been some build up to this, and that there might be a mutual interest. So maybe it does get done. Just the fact that like the first day after the weekend of the games just signals to me strong interest. So maybe it gets done.
If the Jets are his preference truly, and he's their preference, and they can come together on a contract where they're both happy, then freaking do it. Like I'm completely okay with that. So, we got our first super chat coming back. Beloved peace. Great to hear from you guys. What do you think they should do at right tackle? Obviously, so they have their left tackle through right guards situated. I would say based on, and I didn't even answer the question from Peter Yeti about the offensive line. But it seems like Campbell, some people think he may be a guard, and then Banks Jr. is like the next tackle prospect that they have. As like, the next guy, but it seems like 7 might be a little bit high for him. So I think as of right now, tackle at 7 may be a reach. My opinion may change in a month when I do a lot more research on that and actually watch these guys. So it may be a little bit of a reach to draft one. So that kind of ties into this question. But for me, it's you draft the guy in the 2nd, 3rd, 4th round, or bring in like one of those guys in free agency who's like, hey, he was behind Lane Johnson. He only played 8 games, but when he did, they were all very successful. So I'd bring like a developmental guy, whether it be, again, lack of NFL experience or a guy in college, and also bring Moses back. I think he's a good leader. I think when he plays, he's solid. Unfortunately, he was injured a lot this year, which happens with age, but you sign him I think because of the injuries, you can get him for a relatively cheap contract and you develop a guy behind him. That would be my plan right now at right tackle. But obviously we have a long way to go. If there's a guy in free agency, I don't know, whatever, Austin Smith, I have no idea who's in free agency right now, and he's an absolute stud and you want to land him and you want to solidify the offensive line, then fine. But right now I'm probably leaning towards like Moses and a developmental guy without knowing what's really out there in free agency.
Yeah, I think I'm on the same page as you. I think Moses has shown enough to be viewed as a good stopgap still at this point of his career. And, age-wise, for an offensive lineman, 30, he's going to be 34 this year, is not, some guys fall off there, some guys don't. So have a few years left. So I think he's still viable as a stopgap if he's interested in that. But, yeah, I definitely got to dig deeper into the free agent class and all that. I'm sure there will be some decent options, but it is exciting for the Jets to only have really one offensive line spot that needs addressing going into an offseason. That is definitely the fewest that I can remember since watching this team, at least, since way back.
Yeah, that receiver position, though, that's just a barren wasteland. I'm just so concerned about receiver. We're gonna wrap up because we're about to wrap up because we've been on for 2 hours. I don't want to keep Nania for too long. We set at 2 hours, but so if any last second questions, throw them in. We'll kind of lightning around a few of these. Cowardly to not hire McCown. I think you're being like not like ignorant, but like that's just that if somebody's saying like it's cowardly not to hire him, it's just like, hey, I want to take this massive risk. I just think you're being kind of crazy at that point. I don't know. Highly doubt the Saints let him out of the building if we set him free tonight. Again, I am completely fine with locking the doors and getting Glenn. He's my number one for the reasons we said. I think he's a mixture of leadership, and he's proven something with that defense. Again, do not let one game, skew you. Look into the injuries, look into what he took over, how bad they were before he got there, and how they consistently improved, and how he overcame injuries this year and was still a good defense. And again, Parcells, Peyton, Campbell are the guys he's been brought up under. And a lot of people talk about him like he's going to be a successful head coach, or at least think he can be. Based on how he treats guys and how he's developed guys. Again, Marshawn Lattimore, Kirby Joseph, plenty of people. Okay, let's keep going through here. Yet again, another reason why I hate pre-Super Bowl coach hires. Kingsbury needs an interview. Yeah, again, it's just a thing where, and you'd agree with me, Swolesy, it's just a thing where the system's broken right now with how that works. Kingsbury could be great, but you put all your chips in his basket and all the other guys sign, you settle for your fifth guy because you try to go for your number one because your 2, 3, and 4, we're already signed somewhere else. So do you think there's any significance to this? Actually, I think it's a good point by Swolesy, if this is what he's insinuating. Like, you think it's impactful that he is being brought in for a second interview before the GM is even there? Because you'd assume that the GM would want to be there for the second interviews because they only typically have 2, maybe 3 sometimes. I don't think that even really happens a lot. So is it significant that they're interviewing him for a second time before GM's even in place?
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting. I mean, I think they are supposed to do those second round of GM interviews this week, right? I believe that's what the report was, but I don't know. I do feel like if they let him leave, that the Saints might close that deal. So do they hire him now? Get him, maybe that's the goal. Get him hired so he can be involved in these, final round of GM interviews.
Mm-hmm. Danger Zone says his show is entirely about feet. I'm not going to put in anything else about there, but if you want to listen to feet, go to Danger Zone. This is a hard hitting argument against us, Claudio. This is a Twitter level take. This is trash. I bet you were too high in the second round pick from BYU. Hope Woody picked Glenn and shoves it all in your faces. Thank you, man. You really told us why you didn't like Glenn, while we're wrong for talking about Glenn and who you prefer. Classic, Claudio. Thank you for really adding to the show, you fucking idiot. Okay. All for punting this year at quarterback, bringing another guy to play behind Tyrod, Joshua Dobbs, Tyler Heineke. Yeah, well, I think they're punting, like Nania said. McDaniels gets fired. Where do you bring him as an OC? Sure. Why not? Like, I would love McDaniels as an OC if he was fired. Top receivers in this draft, I do not know. I know McMillan is the top guy, and I will be looking at McMillan, but past him, I'm not sure. In terms of the top 10 guys, I've only seen McMillan mentioned, so that's why I'm going to do him. How do you hire Glenn without a GM first? It's a thing where, hey, he may have the first interview said, I like or have connections with this guy. The Jets have already interviewed those guys, and they like those guys. I'm going to let Glenn pick the GM, or if Glenn said, hey, I like Sullivan, I like Hallaby, and I like, this guy, the Jets will then pick out of those three. Like it's it could work out where the coach kind of looks for the GM. I don't think it's that crazy. Would be cool if we signed Glenn and he could bring in whoever's in charge of the O-line and running back or receiver group. Do you have any knowledge to like Glenn's connections for OC? Obviously that's a huge talking point with a defensive head coach. Is there any like guys he's been linked to at OC who could be a good candidate, or maybe a guy with the Saints? I know like there's Peter Carmichael, right, who used to be a OC. Was there connection to Peterson at some point? I believe Doug Peterson. I could be wrong there again. I haven't been so up with some of the OCs and stuff like that, but
yeah, well, I think it's in terms of the connections, it's mostly based around that New Orleans tenure. Pete Carmichael, like you said, was the Saints OC for a long time. Now he's an assistant with the Broncos, so that would be a promotion for him. And obviously he was under Sean Payton, but they had a couple seasons after Payton left where they stuck with Carmichael, and they were decent, but not great. Joe Lombardi also was a quarterback's coach in New Orleans. Now he's the Broncos OC. There's also
they did well with Knicks this year.
Yeah, I threw this one out there, but John Morton, the former Jet, he has ties to Glenn from both New Orleans and Detroit. And right now he's the passing game coordinator in Denver. So that's an interesting one. He
was the best OC we've had in the past 2 decades.
Yep.
And I'm not just saying that. Like that, look at what he did with McCown in 2017. Like our offense was scoring 30 plus points in multiple games. Like I'll be completely okay with Morton coming back.
Yeah, honestly, that's the one that I'm looking at. I don't know, you don't know what their relationship is or anything, but they did cross paths on 2 different teams recently, and it would be an upgrade or a promotion for Morton. So I got my eyes on that one as a dark horse.
We fired Morton, who had the best offense in two decades, to hire some guy who was like hiking mountains and was in the NFL for multiple years. Like, what are we doing? Apparently, there was some like beef between Morton and the head coach or something like that, or whatever. But dude, I'm cool with Morton. But yeah, those are some good names. Like those are some names that I've heard about being in
Jeremy Bates hasn't even been in the NFL since that season.
Yeah, it's absolutely brutal. Schedule the GM's interview simultaneously. Are you talking about like at the same time they both interview? I almost want Glenn to get hired by the Saints to have a shot at King. Yeah, again, hey, if we get Kingsbury, fine. But what happens if this doesn't happen? Or what happens again if Kingsbury says no to the Jets? Glenn gets hired by the Saints, and then we settle for Michael Nania's preferred combo of Nagy and Grigson.
Yeah.
So
we don't want guys.
Grigson, dude. I saw that name be brought up, and again, I'm not the biggest in terms of like knowing, candidates, and GMs, and all that stuff. But I know Grigson for ruining Andrew Luck. Like that's absolutely not what you do. But first time head coach shouldn't be picking a GM. I disagree. That's completely fine. It's not a thing that's going to deter me. I don't think if there was some proven GM out there and he wanted to pick a head coach, fine. But I don't think there's some slam dunk GM where I think it's kind of on both sides. Like you need to be a good, like if there's a slam dunk GM, Joe Douglas level GM this offseason, obviously that didn't work out, then yeah, fine. But is there some GM who like demands respect where he needs to pick a coach? Like I don't know. I just don't see it as that big of a deal. They got to work simultaneously together. So John Morton was legit best OC in 20 years. So yeah, no doubt. Like that's I don't think that's a question. Aaron Glenn getting second interview already. Yep, today. Hit the like. Appreciate that. Okay, Nania, appreciate you jumping on for 2 hours. You want to link any articles, anything coming up? I'm sure you'll be back on with me in the next month or so. Again, I don't know if I'll be back next week or the week after. Probably next week, honestly, because I think the Jets are going to make a hire in the next week. But I do plan on being back at least bi-weekly for the offseason. And then we'll get back to weekly when it picks up a little bit. Nania will be back for quite a few of those, I'm sure. But is there anything you want to plug, Nania?
Honestly, I roll with it. I don't care what people say. It's interesting to hear the different takes on it. I'm okay with it. But yeah, just only thing I'm gonna plug is jetsxfactor.com. Don't read my tweets, they're bad. Please read my articles. Go get the full scope of what I'm trying to say. Like 280 characters isn't enough for me. I don't have the subscription anymore. I had that for a few months, but got rid of it because I'm not supporting that. So I'm stuck with 280 characters. It's not enough for me. read the articles if you want my fully fleshed out opinions.
Nania is saying to get rid of your TikTok brains and actually be able to read an article for 3 minutes, which I think is important too. I do think it's like headline capturing the last couple of years of media. But yeah, nonetheless, I will be back relatively soon. Appreciate you guys for sticking through with me through the hiatus and all that. Appreciate you guys, and